I ask, perfect, got the recording started. It is 6:03 p.m. We'll call this meeting to order. Before we jump into the agenda, let me ask Mr. Stevenson if he has any pre-meeting items that he'd like to cover.
Yes, President Akbari, just briefly, I'd like to say good evening to everyone. And on behalf of the ACWD Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome the public's participation in this board meeting. My name is Ed Stevenson, and I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this public meeting either by using the Zoom application or by telephone. If you're participating by Zoom, we ask that all participants mute your microphone unless you're speaking. You may also be placed on mute by the Assistant District Secretary. The Assistant District Secretary will unmute participants at the appropriate times when the board is receiving public comments. In Zoom, you'll be able to view presentation materials as they're presented to the board. At any time, you may submit a question or raise your hand in the Zoom app, and you'll be called upon at the appropriate time. If you are participating via telephone, again, we ask that you put your phone on mute, and you may view the meeting agenda, staff reports, and presentation materials, which have all been posted to the district website at www.acwd.org, and follow along that way. This Zoom webinar is being recorded, and it'll be made available to the public for future viewing. The board will be working through a very full agenda this evening, including a public hearing to receive public input on the transition from at-large to zone-based elections for members of the board of directors. And that public hearing will begin as close as possible to 8 p.m. There are also multiple staff presentations and 3 closed sessions that will be covered near the end of the meeting. While the board convenes privately in closed session, members of the public may remain logged on to Zoom or stay on the phone to be informed of board reports once the closed sessions are concluded. Again, thanks everyone for attending, and that completes my housekeeping remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. We'll move to item 1. Roll call, please.
Directors Weed.
Here.
Gunther.
Here.
Huang. Here. Sethi.
Here.
And Akbari.
Here. Director Sethi, would you like to lead us in the salute to the flag, please?
What's he gonna chase? The slider? Nah. The changeup?
Hold on here. Hold on here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Director Sethi.
I'm sorry. I need to mute myself here because I've got something else in the background. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My other pledge is I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Go Giants.
Thank you so much, Director Sethi. And I'm going to apologize to the members of the public. I'm feeling a little bit ill today, and so if my voice is not as pronounced today, please let me know, and I'll try and enunciate as best I can. With that, we will move to item 3, public comments. Are there any members of the public who wish to make a comment at this time? And you can do so by raising your hand in the Zoom app, or you can get our attention by dropping a note in the chat feature. I'm seeing no hands raised in the Zoom app. Can I ask the district secretary to confirm that we have no one in the chat who wishes to speak at this time?
That's correct. We have nothing in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Well, with that, we'll close our public comment section for this portion, and we'll move on to our special presentation, the 2021 Watersense Award recognition, and I will turn it over to our general manager, Mr. Stevenson.
Thank you, President Akbari. We're excited to have this special presentation this evening, and I'd like to turn it over to Laura Heides, our Director of Water Resources, to get us started.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Staff is very pleased to have this item on the agenda tonight to receive the 2021 Watersense Award, that I'm holding up so that hopefully you can see it on the screen. I'd like to welcome and thank Veronica Bloody from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, who's joining us tonight all the way from the East Coast to share more information about the Watersense program, excuse me, and to present this award. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the district's water use efficiency team members who have joined us tonight. Water use efficiency supervisor Stephanie Nevins, water use efficiency specialist Megan Moreno, and water use efficiency specialist Giselle Delgadillo, who led the effort to apply for this award. And now, with a warm ACWD welcome, I'd like to turn it over to Veronica Bloody to make this special presentation.
Thanks, Laura, and good evening, President Akbari, members of the board. You guys are keeping me late in my office here on a Thursday night, but I am happy to do it. As Laura said, I'm Veronica Bloody. I'm the manager of the U.S. EPA's Watersense program, and our program is focused on helping Americans find simple ways to save water through the use of more water-efficient products, practices, and services, and I'm really happy to be able to join you. I would hope that by now that you guys are in California, you are very familiar with Watersense, but I want to emphasize just a couple of points. We're a voluntary partnership program, and our partners include the manufacturers who are making the products, the retailers who are selling them, and promotional partners. And I consider water providers to be our most critical promotional partners because you're on the front lines in communicating with customers. Thus, much of our programming is focused on working with partners like you and giving you tools to help make your jobs easier. We have more than 2,100 partners across the country, and that includes more than 300 in California. And over the last 15 years, they've all helped us save more than 5.3 trillion gallons of water and 108 billion in consumer bills. One of the highlights of my year is our annual recognition of our Partners of the Year. We usually do that in Las Vegas at the Water Smart Innovations Conference, which was last week. But with the ongoing travel restrictions due to the pandemic, we are presenting our 34 awards in a variety of ways this year. And so I'm happy to join you here via Zoom to give you the award for excellence in promoting water-sensible products for your efforts in 2020. If we learned anything over the last year, it's the power of resilience, the ability to adapt to whatever is thrown at us. And our partners developed great resilience as they quickly pivoted their programs to respond to the inability to meet people face to face. And we suspect that, like other Watersense partners, you were busy because many people were spending more time at home and they started to notice things like maybe their leaking toilet, or maybe their increasing water bill, or maybe their yard that really could use some tender loving care. And as people were on the lookout for ways to reduce their water use, I think Alameda County really came through, distributing water-sensible shower heads and aerators and rebating a variety of plumbing products. I was really impressed by the growth of your rebate program for weather-based irrigation controllers from 5 the previous year to close to 200 in 2020. And I think it showed that easing the process for issuing the rebates can make a real difference. Like many of our partners, it looks like the success that you guys had is something you're going to maintain after we get back from pandemic lives to maybe our normal lives, because they're just proved to be more effective for you. I also appreciated that you looked to target assistance to those who faced real economic hardships, as many people lost jobs due to the slowdown in the economy. Your Water Savings Assistance Partnership program with PG&E helped low-income customers, and your outreach to seniors and communities that don't traditionally participate in programs pay dividends in helping customers save money on their bills and to help the district achieve real water savings that you can maintain going forward. As a small voluntary program, there's only like 7 of us running the program here at the national level. We're looking to really help consumers save water, energy, and money, but we need to rely on the efforts of a lot of other people to help us spread the word about the program. And Alameda County really did step up in a big way in 2020. So we very much appreciate your efforts and the commitment of all of your staff working on water efficiency. And I look forward to seeing what the district has in store for the future. So again, congratulations on this recognition and best wishes for more achievements. I'm happy to answer any questions. I will not be staying on for the rest of your meeting. I'm sorry to tell you. I'm going to go home and go to sleep. But I really have treasured the opportunity to visit many of our partners via Zoom and Teams last year and this year. So if you have any questions, please, I'm here for you. Oh, and I'll just give you a round of applause. You all should applaud yourselves for your work.
Well, Ms. Bloody, we greatly appreciate you taking the time to join us today, especially considering how late in your day it is, and for working with our team on water efficiency and water usage. So greatly appreciate your work in that. Let me open it up to the board, see if anyone has any comments. Otherwise, I do want to extend a hearty congratulations to Ms. Nevins, Ms. Marino, Ms. Delgadillo, and the entire team for making this award possible. I mean, a huge shout out to each of you.
This is Director Sethi. I concur with the president's comments. Thank you and congratulations to staff. And I wish the EPA program much success moving forward too.
Thank you very much.
This is Director Gunther. Thank you for the EPA recognition. We really do appreciate it, and very much thanks to the staff. You guys do a great job. Unsung heroes. Keep it up. It's tough. Thank you so much, and it was nice that we were recognized because it's you that did this. Thank you very much.
John Weed, thank you very much for the recognition.
You're very welcome. Okay, well, thank you again. And anybody else, any other comments or questions? No, I'll let you get on to your religious.
I think the only request I'm going to make is that we make sure that we get maybe a press release or get this on our website, because this is a great story for us to share with our community.
Good. Well, congratulations again. And like I said, you guys are doing yeoman's work. The drought, we're thinking about everybody in California, and so continued success in getting people to be more water efficient, thoughtful about how they use water.
I will note that the news is already on our website. And as
fantastic.
I talked to Mr. Stevenson earlier today, out of the, I think, 33 or 35 awards, we were really only one of a handful of water districts that were recipients of this award. The others were other people in the water industry. So it's a very distinguishing award nationally for us to receive this. And I think it's well earned.
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. I don't know if I can say go Giants, but you know, the best teams win.
Well, thank you, Ms. Buddy. Appreciate you joining us tonight.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye now. Wonderful. Well, that is always it's always great to start a meeting with a good news item. So again, appreciate all the work that staff put in for us to get that award. With that, we will move to item 4, consent calendar. Are there any items that directors wish to add to the consent calendar tonight?
I'll go ahead and move item 5.1 and 5.2 to the consent calendar this evening.
And I will second.
Great. Roll call, please.
Directors Weed,
Aye.
Gunther,
All right.
Huang,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and Akbari.
Aye. Is there a motion to adopt the consent calendar as amended?
I'll move consent calendar as amended.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Directors Weed,
Aye.
Gunther,
All right.
Huang,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
Akbari.
Aye. Moving on to item 5.3, authorization of agreement for a leak detection and monitoring system. And I think we'll send this over to our general manager.
Yes, thank you, President Akbari. And this item will be presented by our Director of Operations and Maintenance, Mr. Kurt Ahrens.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. This is Kurt Ahrens, the Director of Operations and Maintenance. The item for you tonight is a kind of exciting new program we've been piloting for the last 10 months. It's the Mueller Ecologic leak detection system. This is an acoustic monitoring system which detects leaks in the distribution system. It's important to note this is one of the few ways to detect leaks, subsurface leaks, that can go undetected. It's with a successful pilot Staff is now recommending an expansion of the system over the next 8 years. And to provide a little more detail about the program and the proposal, I am going to introduce Robert Ells, our Distribution and Maintenance Manager, who's going to provide a short presentation. So with that, Robert.
Thank you, Kurt. Good evening, President Akbari and board members. I'll be giving this presentation here on the Mueller Ecologic DX leak detection system, like Mr. Aarons alluded to. So with that, if you could change a slide there. Start with types of leaks is in the distribution system. General ones are service leaks and subsurface leaks. Normally, you'll have about a split of 25% surface leaks and 75% go unnoticed underground with no indication. So this is one of these systems that we're looking at to get after those subsurface leaks that we don't see. Next slide, please. We investigated different methods and systems, and just a quick rundown: satellite, which is microwave, and that's done from a lot of satellites out in space, of course, and flyovers with thermal imaging done by planes and so forth, as well as pressure monitoring with SCADA and continuous monitoring of the pressure systems. Also flow analysis, SCADA combined with district metered areas. And of course, the one we were looking at was the acoustic, which is sensors that are attached to hydrants, and we'll get in really quick. Continuous, it's surface and subsurface monitoring. Next slide, please. Our valuation process, we met with vendors and various agencies. We evaluated cost, effectiveness, and application to the district system. And we also considered the limitations and flexibility of the system. Next slide, please. Product choice we came with is a Mueller's Ecologic DX, which I'm talking about. It's an acoustic fixed mobile. And if you can look at that hydrant there, you'll see that 4.5-inch steamer cap. That's an actually integrated cap that has cellular electronics issues in it that record the acoustic node and send it out to be processed at a data center. They're acoustic, it's off-site hosting and data refinement, and the only problem you still need is some pinpointing. You get a good location on it, but also you still do pinpointing in the field. Next slide, please. Our pilot approach was 50 hydrants with this 4.5 connection that I alluded to earlier, attachment there, deploy them into low-level leak areas to really test their portability and accuracy. We find something. You can find the leaks fairly easy in high leak areas. I wanted to find an area that we normally don't have leaks, so we thought that was a better route to test their the accuracy of it and the system reporting. Also, the software ease, we wanted to see how easy it was, and of course, like I said earlier, the reporting accuracies. It was a 10-month pilot. Next slide, please. And the two areas were monitored for 5 months each, and then the portability of the system, we transferred them to the second area. 2 subsurface leaks were identified and repaired, which showed nothing at all at the surface, not even moss growing in the gutters whatsoever. And we found it fairly easy to just disconnect and move over to the different areas, the 2 areas that we want to do. Drawbacks of the system is there's limitations with the system, pipe material, plastic pipe, mains in general. It still doesn't as accurate as in that area, the arena, and also with 12-inch mains, anything above that, the system doesn't work as well. And then the third issue is hydrant spacing. The area that needs to be monitored has to have appropriate spacing of the hydrants. We can't have one hydrant 1,000 feet away and one there because it's not as accurate. So they look for the norm of about 250 to 350 feet apart. Next slide, please. So moving forward, we have a contract with Mueller for stepped increase in nodes, monitoring and reporting over 8 years. Coverage for over 10% of qualified hydrants. We have over like 9,000 hydrants in our system, but about 6,700 of them actually accept the 4.5-inch steamer connection. Ultra-solid hydrants just have 2.5-inch connections, but apparently Mueller's working on that to develop the 2.5-inch nodes that'll fit on that. Moving forward, we want to deploy them now in high-level leak areas where we've had some catastrophic leaks, in particular Yakima Circle recently, which was somewhere in the $100,000 to repair. And then another thing we want to be cognizant of, cautious approach, is there's no one leak detection system that fits all the needs. So we want to be able to blend it with other newer technology that comes around. Next slide, please. System benefits identifies leaks that go undetected. Once again, most of these systems that we identified and we looked at, it's about a 75% of your leaks are subsurface that you never see. And like I said, it allows for early detection and repair, reducing damage from total failure. Water loss improves our drought response. It supports an annual water loss audit required by state board. And it allows for planned repairs and reducing overtime as opposed to be reactive. And it can be planned and during normal working hours when we have these. Next slide, please. It's an 8-year contract, yet not to exceed 1.51. And hardware purchase and service costs average about 131 annually. Main and service leaks that we constantly do day in and day out here average anywhere from 40,000 to 15. Major leak repairs and property damage on some of these big ones, like I just alluded to on Yakima, it's upwards of 100,000 that can occur once it does rupture and do property damage and so forth. Next slide, please. So recommendation by motion, authorize the general manager to enter into an 8-year agreement with the Mueller Water Products Incorporated, doing business as Ecologic LLC for a leak detection and monitoring system for a total not to exceed amount of $1,051,500. And next slide. Questions?
Thank you so much. Let me open it up to the board to see if there's any questions or comments.
I have some comments. Attending some of the conferences with the dealers and representations, one of the suggested strategies was for the district to put into new construction where we're developing new water systems, a requirement that the developer install some hydrants that are capable of having the sonic detection capabilities. There are hydrants which don't have to be modified, they're integral into the hydrant. I believe Mueller makes some of those. So that would be the one thought staff to look at. The second is the ability to lift and shift, is the term they use, where we can detach these 4-inch hubs and saturate an area where we're concerned about, and then move through the district to get a much more detailed background ambient levels and measurements. So in the future, if we had to go in, we'd be able to at least have the ambient base. The third point being that the need to tie this into our GIS. And hopefully that is being done and has been, and I don't know if that's part of the proposed contract or not. So that's a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Weed.
So there was a question to staff there about whether or not this system would be integrated with our GIS system, and I wonder if staff would like to address that.
What I'd say to that, I know there's some meetings going on right now with transporting the data, the GIS out of the system, and working with the AMI project. I believe Ben Edgars could answer that better, but there have been several meetings, and apparently there's sounds like a good possibility that that's going to work to do some overlay with that. I'm not quite familiar with particulars, but there have been several meetings.
Yeah, it's my understanding it's not part of this contract, but the contract does result in data that's furnished to the district, and we have the ability to integrate that data in a number of different ways.
Right.
Then will we have the ability to integrate it with pressure readings throughout the system as well? In real time?
We currently don't have, pressure monitoring throughout the distribution system. So there's limited data, mostly just at facilities. So at this point, I'd say no, it's not integrated with the pressure monitoring system. That is another approach that can be used, is distributing, pressure system or pressure monitors throughout the system. That's just a different technology and a different approach to monitoring your distribution system.
Well, let me encourage you, when we do go, which I think most districts will, to a pressure monitoring system as well. We require that it be integrated with the sonic system. Thank you.
Director Gunther, it sounds like a very good system. I request that we perhaps get some updates periodically of what we're finding out there. It sounds like we've already got 2 leaks that we wouldn't have found, which makes the system really pay off. And I'd be very curious to see how the rest of it goes as we continue to push it out. Thank you.
Sure
Thank you,
will.
Director Gunther. Any other questions or comments from the board before I open it up to the public? Hearing none, let me open it up to members of the public to see if there's any questions or comments. Mr. Ken N.
Thank you, President Akbari. Unfortunately, I was unable to attend the committee meeting when this technology was first described, but I've done some research on it, and I think it's a very clever system. And I support the district moving ahead from the pilot to the next phase. Yeah, detecting leaks is extremely important. It is lost water, and again, based on all the different technologies that are out there, this one seems to be pretty sound. I've read their patents that cover it, and if imitation is a vote of confidence, at least 2 companies have tried to copy their technology and they've been sued. So I think they have a pretty technologically differentiated means of leak detection, and it seems to work based on your pilot. So I support it, and I urge the district to go ahead and deploy it to find as many leaks as possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Nishimura. Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a comment or ask a question? If not, let me turn it back to the board, see if we have a motion for this item.
I'll move staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Directors Weed,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and Akbari.
Aye. Moving on to item 5.4, authorization of agreement for meter shop upgrades and support services, and I will turn it to our general manager, Mr. Stevenson.
Yes, President Akbari, this item will also be introduced by our director of operations and maintenance, Kurt Ahrens.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. President Akbari. This item, no presentation, but I will go through the summary of the item. The current Mars meter test bench station has been in operation since 2006 and serves an essential tool for testing the accuracy of the district's meters. Accuracy confirmation for customer meters and confirming new meter accuracy has been a critical role in ensuring reliable water revenue billing for the system. The computer system used by the test bench is nearing the end of its useful life and is no longer supported. In order to maintain the long-term functionality of the Mars test bench system, proprietary software upgrades are needed. The planned upgrades will also support the district's transition to ultrasonic flow meters. The proposed upgrades will include new hardware, incorporate console changes, and improve equipment along with maintenance and software training and support. Adequate funds are included in the 2021-22 budget and will be included in future budgets. Board authorization of this agreement will assist the district in achieving strategic plan goal 1.1, efficiently manage and maintain our infrastructure to ensure reliability. I did want to add a few comments. This item was presented to Operations and Water Quality Committee in October, and there were some questions about the future of the meter shop, especially given the district's move to ultrasonic flow meters. Ultrasonic flow meters are static meters, meaning there's no real moving parts within them, unlike our old meter population that will be changing out, which are displacement or mechanical meters that do degrade over time. All small meters, whether they're going to be ultrasonic or our old displacement meters, are typically replaced if they fail. We don't repair the small meters. We do repair our large meters. So the question was asked basically, do we still need a meter shop? And is there still a function to continue this activity? So in my opinion, the short answer is yes. I want to provide some details about currently what the role of the meter shop is now and going forward. During the implementation of AMI, the meter shop's been performing quality control checks on the new ultrasonic meters. So basically, as these new meters come in, and as we move forward with about 80,000 meters, we randomly check. We try to ideally check about 10%. That's quite a bit when you talk about 80,000. But we do random tests of the ultrasonic meters as they come in just to check reliability, check accuracy. Even though they're factory tested, I believe we so far in the proof of concept, we did find 2 anomalies. Typically, it's electronic issues. It's not the meter itself, it's electronics. We also anticipate that one of the services we provide our customers is to check their meter if they have a question about the accuracy. So we do anticipate moving forward with ultrasonics as these meters may read more accurately and may read differently than previous meters that were on a home. We may get more requests to confirm that the actual reading of the meter is accurate because it's maybe different than they're used to seeing from their old meter. In addition to that, the district also has over 700 large mechanical meters still in the distribution system. We've just changed those out over the last couple of years, and they account for about 17% of the district's total consumption. So we have an annual program where we try to check the accuracy of about the top 25% of those mechanical meters that will continue to provide that service and provide that accuracy checks for the district. So in the future, there may be a day in the future that technology advances and the functions of the meter shop aren't tested or aren't needed. At this time, I think there's actually a significant workload. We already have significant investment in the test bench system, trained staff, and the ability to do this work ourselves. So I am supporting a suggestion or the recommendation to go ahead with these upgrades and encourage the board to ask any questions. The recommendation tonight before you is by motion to authorize the general manager to enter an agreement with Mars Company for meter test bench upgrades. This includes hardware and system upgrades, a 5-year software license, and 5 years of software and hardware maintenance for not to exceed amount of $730,000. And with that, I'll be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Arends. Let me turn to the board, see if we have any questions or comments from the board.
Comment and some questions, if I might. That's John Weed. As you referenced and heard, the technology is rapidly changing. The issue, and thank you for pointing out that the ultrasonic meters, which we're now taking 65,000 new to the smaller meters, have no moving parts. The issue is electronic testing, and that can probably be done on a bench test with may not require flow of water. And that will eventually migrate into the larger meters. Neptune now produces a meter which has a removable electronic component with the battery where you leave the meter in the ground, which with no moving parts shouldn't be an issue. So it's coming along. The one thought I have is that it was noted that ACWD has taken a lead in its water meter reading capability and measurements, and that other districts have followed our pattern. Do we have the ability to contract out with other districts to do meter testing? I believe Valley Water District was doing that with some of the cities in Santa Clara.
I believe in the past, we have used prior to having our own meter shop. I believe the district did use an external service. I'll ask Mr. Ells if he has any input. I know we've looked at this in the past, that obviously if you want to pay a fee, there's always somebody willing to do the work. But
I'm thinking if we now are going to have the state-of-the-art flow test for the older meters, the new meters you repair by replacement, but the old meters you actually did to do some fixing.
Right.
So the question is, should we go into the business and offer our services on a contract basis? So with
gotcha.
utility from the new facility.
Good question. Since Mr. Robert Ells, or the distribution maintenance manager, oversees the meter shop. I'll ask him about taking on additional workload and contracting for outside people.
Yeah, I'm familiar with other water districts doing that, or water utilities having excess capacity. I would say that's something we need to look into, Director Weed. And we do have, like I said, a system that's fairly nice and that can accommodate some extra testing. So that'd be something we'd have to look into.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Director Gunther. I support Director Weed's comments on that. I was thinking the same thing. So yeah, I really think there might be an opportunity there. Thank you.
This is Director Sethi. I also concur with Director Weed, and I will note that there are a lot of water districts outside of the Bay Area that don't have the financial capacity to do these kind of things. And so we might offer our services to the Central Valley, Northern California, some other areas outside of, you know, your traditionally larger water districts here in the Bay Area.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely something we can look into. I know, yeah, local large agencies typically have their own meter shops and provide their own service, but I'm sure small agencies don't have that capacity. So we can definitely follow up on that.
Yeah, I just want to concur with Director Wee's suggestion, but I would ask staff to look into this very carefully because we are ramping up with AMI and we will be testing quite a few meters if our goal is 10%. So that just makes sure that we actually have the capacity, both staffing, not just the bench and the material, but actually have the staffing to carry out these additional work.
Yeah, I would anticipate, you know, if we anticipate actually changing out, you know, all this ultrasonic meters, and if we see a decrease in maybe workload for the meter shop over time, you know, next 3 or 4 years down the road, this is an opportunity, right, to utilize that excess capacity and pick up staff and pick up work. I don't anticipate it happening, yes, during implementation of AMI, but it is a good option. You know, if we do see as we change out with more new meters and fewer issues, that we do have excess capacity, it's an excellent idea.
I have a question for Mr. Stevenson or Mr. Wunderlich, if he's available. If we are able to source out work to other water districts, can this be counted as non-water revenues into the district for the purposes of helping to fund, let's say, Help on Tap or something like that?
Mr. Wunderlich is not with us tonight. We've got Mariana Grajeda filling in for him. However, I would say that would definitely be something we could look into, Director Sethi.
Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. And I too would echo the sentiment that was shared by my fellow directors and agree with Director Weed's comments. Let me open it up now to members of the public, see if there's any questions or comments on this item. Seeing no hands raised in the Zoom app and nothing in the chat, I'll turn it back to our directors to see if we have a motion on the table.
I'll move staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Great. Roll call, please.
Directors Weed,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and Akbari.
Aye. With that, we move to item 5.5, resolution awarding contract for the Niles Cone Groundwater Basin Extraction Well Site Evaluation Project. And I will turn it back to Mr. Stevenson.
Yes, thank you, President Akbari. And this item will be presented by our Director of Water Resources, Ms. Laura Heides.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. The district has undertaken the Niles Cone Groundwater Basin Well Site Evaluation Project with partial funding provided through a grant agreement with the State Water Resources Control Board Division of Financial Assistance. The project proposes the geologic and hydrogeologic evaluation of 3 locations in the central portion of the Niles Cone Groundwater Basin, where groundwater wells can potentially be sited to remove brackish water in the Centerville-Fremont aquifer. In accordance with this California Environmental Quality Act, a notice of exemption was prepared for the project, and along with approval of the project, was adopted by the board on May 14th, 2020. 2 bids to perform the work were recently received, opened, and evaluated. The low bid contained minor irregularities which may be waived. There is adequate funding in the fiscal year 2021-22 capital improvement program budget for this expenditure. Awarding the contract for this project will help meet the district's strategic plan goal 2.1, maintain and enhance sustainability and reliability of local and regional water supplies. So tonight's recommendation is by motion. 1, waive the minor irregularities in the Pitcher Services LLC bid and adopt a resolution awarding the contract for the Niles Cone Groundwater Basin Extraction Well Site Evaluation Project to Pitcher Services LLC in the amount of $1,049,500, job 10097. And I might have missed a line of that, but hopefully that stands.
Great, thank you, Ms. Hydas. Let me see if there are any directors with questions or comments on this item. Hearing none, let me open it up to members of the public for any questions or comments on this item. Seeing no hands raised, I'll turn it back to the board for a motion.
I'll move staff recommendation.
I'll second again.
Roll call, please.
Directors Weed,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and Akbari.
Aye. Moving to item 5.6, resolution making findings pursuant to Assembly Bill 361 that the proclaimed state of emergency continues to impact the ability to meet safely in person and authorizing continuing to hold public meetings virtually. And I will turn it back to Mr. Stevenson.
Thank you, President Akbari. And since March 17 of 2020, the Board of Directors has held its public meetings virtually due to the COVID-19 pandemic and in order to maximize social distancing and community and participant safety. Given the ongoing situation with COVID-19, the board wishes to continue to hold all of its public meetings, including Board of Directors and board committee meetings virtually. In order to do so, the board must make certain findings pursuant to Assembly Bill 361 and will continue to reaffirm these findings every 30 days until it is deemed safe to return to in-person board and public meetings. So this action supports the district's strategic plan goal 5.1 to increase awareness of district services, mission, and value in the community by ensuring that all members of the public can participate in board discussions regardless of their location and despite the ongoing pandemic. So this action essentially provides for continuing virtual meetings even after the governor's order that suspended certain provisions of the Brown Act was expired at the end of September. So staff's recommendation is by motion, adopt a resolution making findings pursuant to Assembly Bill 361 that the proclaimed state of emergency continues to impact the ability to meet safely in person. And I'd be happy to address any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Are there any questions or comments from the board? If not, I'll open it up for questions or comments from members of the public. Otherwise, I will turn it back to the board for a motion, please.
I'll move staff recommendation.
Second from Director Sethi.
Roll call, please.
Directors Weed,
Aye.
Gunther, Director Gunther,
Help with the mute off. Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and Akbari.
Aye. Wonderful. We'll move on to item 6 and start with item 6.1, board committee reports. Do any directors or members of the public have any questions or comments on any of the items under 6.1? Hearing none, we will move on to item 6.2, operational reports. And again, I'll open it up to our board and members of the public to see if they have any questions or comments on any of our operational reports. Mr. Ken N.
Well, if Director Gunther is not going to beat me to it again, I will make a comment on your hardness map at the very, very end. Again, I commend the district for its ability to keep the water hardness at or below its target for all customers in the district. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nishimura. Hearing no other questions or comments, we will move on to, item 6.3, and we will start with item 6.3.1, fiscal year 2020-2021 investment portfolio performance report. And I will turn it to our general manager.
And I'm happy to introduce Mariana Grajeda, our acting Finance Department Director. And Mariana is here to get us started with this item.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. And good evening, directors and members of the public. I will be leading the discussion or be leading you through the performance of the district's investment portfolio for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2021. Joining me today for this presentation, I have Christopher McCary from Chandler Asset Management, our portfolio manager advisor. He will be available should there be any questions on the investment report, and he can provide additional details as necessary. Next page, please. So the items for discussion this evening, we're going to go over some milestones that were taken during the year. Then we will provide a brief overview of the portfolio. And lastly, we will go over the performance for the fiscal year. Next page, please. So as many of you are aware, the district was operating in a low interest environment this last fiscal year. And this obviously had an impact on the amount of income earned on the investments. In order to protect the interest income, there was a few actions that we had to take on the investment portfolio. And one of them was to maintain the target duration. As a result of that, we were able to achieve a yield to maturity for the year of 1.55%. This is significantly higher when compared to the investment yield return for the market, which was at 0.46%. Another action that we took during this last fiscal year was to review the investment policy to make sure that we made changes to comply with the California Government Code. Our investment advisor and staff reviewed the policy and made changes earlier this year, which provided more flexibility as it relates to commercial paper and U.S. government securities that resulted or that could result in a zero and negative interest accrual. We reviewed these changes in May with the Finance Committee, and the board approved the updates to the policy in June. Lastly, the last action that we took for the portfolio was to improve the credit quality. And this was achieved by selling a security that was downgraded during the year. We were notified of the downgrade by our investment advisor, and we made the decision to not sell the security right away. Instead, we decided to keep a close watch on it and waited to sell it. And this actually allowed us to sell it at a gain when it was decided that it was time to sell it. So as a result of these three actions and milestones that we took during the year, we were able to achieve our performance objectives and as well as our investment objectives for the year. Next page, please. And as a reference, here I'm not going to go too much into this slide. Is just a list of what are the objectives for the performance of the portfolio. Next slide. So I'm happy to report that the district remains in compliance with all the categories listed on this page and with our investment policy and the California Government Code, as you can see, you know, in the far left, far right on my screen column, you can see that, you know, we remain in compliance with the policy. Next page, please. So I'm going to move now to the portfolio characteristics for the year. And this slide, you can see it's comparing those characteristics to last year. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of things in here that I already mentioned, which is the duration for the portfolio. We were at 2.55%. And you can see that even though we're slightly below our benchmark, it's still consistent with last year at we were at 2.56. So by maintaining that duration, we were able to, as I mentioned, protect the interest income for the district. And you can see that our purchase yield for the year was 1.56%. This obviously decreased from last year. We were at 1.99%, but if you compare it to the market, we're, you know, the portfolio for the district is doing much better. The market yield was at 0.46%. You can also see here that our portfolio remains to be high quality. And you know, the total market that is being managed by our investment advisor has remained consistent at around 170 million. Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides, I'm not going to go too much into this detail. This just gives you a breakdown of the securities that we're currently holding and the percentage that we hold on each securities as compared to last year. The next slide, it gives you a breakdown of the issuers that we have. And as you can see, aside from those that are issued by the US government, which are the top 4 on this spreadsheet, the district does not hold any investments on issuers that are above 5%. Next slide. Next one, please. This just gives you a breakdown again of our duration and how we were compared to last year. And this is just included as a reference. Next slide. And before I turn it over to our investment advisor, this slide just shows you, again, a different view of the distribution of the duration for those investments between last year and the prior year. Next slide. Next one as well. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christopher McCary from Chandler Asset Management, and he will go over the performance for the year on the investment portfolio.
Thank you, Mariana, and good evening, everyone, members of the board. What Mariana had indicated, I'd like to review the investment performance. So for fiscal year 2020-2021, as we can see here, the district had an income earned of $3,357,082. So again, maintaining the investment income that the district is earning through maintaining the duration for the portfolio. But we did see a change in the fair value. So the bonds that the district holds in their portfolio, we did see a change in that fair value decreasing by 3.1 million. Now that is an unrealized change, as we have an unrealized gain still built in the portfolio of 3.7 million. That is a byproduct of the interest rate environment. As we've seen from June of 2020 to June of 2021, we saw interest rates increase, and fixed income bonds specifically have an inverse relationship to the movement of interest rates. Interest rates go up, the fair value of those bonds go down. And so we can see that that change in fair value is representative of the interest rate movements in that environment. But we still have a built-in unrealized gain for the district's portfolio of over 3.7 million. If we turn to the next page, we'll actually review the investment performance or the total return for the district's portfolio. Over the past 3 months, you can see as of 6/30, it had a return of 21 basis points comparatively to the benchmark, the 1 to 5 year US Treasury Agency benchmark of 0.11%, and the 1 to 5 year US Corp and Government Index of 0.16%. However, over the 12-month period, the district's portfolio actually had a positive return of 0.13%, comparatively to the US Treasury Agency Index that had a negative return of minus 0.25%, as well as the 1 to 5 year US Gov Corp Index returning a negative 0.09%. So in a sense, the benefit of the diversification of the district's portfolio, as well as the interest income earned, was able to provide a total return for the districts and a positive return relative to the benchmarks. And finally, as we look since inception from managing the portfolio as of 10/31/2019, we can see the portfolio has a return of 2.55%, comparatively to the US Treasury Agency Index of 2.29% and the US Corporation and Government Index of 2.41%. And that concludes our presentation, and we could address or answer any questions that members of the board may have.
Thank you so much. Let me open it up to the board, see if there are any directors with questions or comments on this item.
None from Director Sethi. Thank you for all your services. Good performance.
Thank you.
None from Director Gunther either. Concur.
John Weed, in order to have a point of reference, could you please give us the total amount of money that we have invested for, which is $3 million plus return is received? And it's my understanding it was a modest bond that we sold that had been downgraded, and certainly less than 1% of our total portfolio. So
yes, so to answer the first question regarding the sale of the bond, we had sold Oracle. We sold that back on April 19th. We had that at par of 500,000. So it was a very small allocation for the overall portfolio. Oracle had gotten downgraded by Moody's and Fitch in March. It was still rated A by S&P. However, we decided to sell and take advantage of the gain for the overall portfolio, locking in a gain for the district of $3,175 for that sale. As for the total value of the investments that we are currently managing for the district, apologize 1 second, that total is $170,705,381.
there's been some suggestions that the district take advantage of the drop in interest rates and therefore the rise in the face value of the various securities we hold in order to capture that gain, that we could then invest in other issues or products. At the same time, we still need to have savings. But your thoughts on our taking advantage, essentially playing the market and capturing the profit that is sitting on the table?
I think some of the challenges with selling some of the positions that have embedded gains is the fact, and Mariana had alluded to this, is that we are still in a low interest rate environment relative to where we're able to purchase and establish some of these gains. So if those positions which would have been sold that do, in a sense, are providing higher interest income for the districts, if they were sold and we were to reinvest those in the market, they possibly would be providing lower income for the district itself. So it would be our recommendation at this time not to sell any of those positions that have embedded gains as we continue moving with the portfolio and managing it to the target duration and following those tenets of safety and liquidity established by the investment policy.
Well, the eventual intent is to utilize that entire $170 million in investments and much of it for capital construction projects.
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of capital construction bills are coming due. Might it be best to dip into to sell some of these bonds, capture the profit, and use that to make our payments, as opposed to only looking at reinvestment as the alternative for the money?
That is an option that we can work with staff. However, there is still portions of the portfolio that are going to be maturing within the next half year to year. that we could also utilize those maturing vehicles as a way to meet any cash needs that the district may have. But if it is prudent that we actually sell positions to meet any cash needs that the district may have, we'll definitely work with staff on making sure we're selling the most opportune positions in the portfolio to meet those needs.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from members of the board? Hearing none, let me open it up for questions or comments from members of the public. If not, I will extend my thanks to Ms. Grajeda and Mr. McCary for the presentation tonight and for all the work that you've done for the district. And I think unless there's anything else on this item, I think we can conclude this presentation.
No, nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Great. With that, we'll move to item 6.3.2, our drought update, and I'll turn it back to our general manager.
Thank you, President Akbari. And this item will be introduced by Director of Water Resources, Ms. Laura Heides.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Tonight, staff is here to share the latest drought updates and what we are doing to prepare for what looks to be a third dry year ahead. We'll be touching on water supply conditions, preparations for 2022, public outreach, and water conservation activity. So I'm pleased to introduce our three speakers today: Water Supply Supervisor Leonard Ash, Public Affairs Supervisor Shireen Gonzalez, and Water Use Efficiency Specialist Megan Moreno. And now I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Ash to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Heides. So the drought is on top of mind for many of us. Last month, you heard from staff about how these last 2 years have been the second driest in our recorded history for local rainfall. And this past water year has been the second driest on record for any single year. Oh, next slide, please. Now, the forecasted conditions remain the same as staff reported last month. One recent development you may have seen today, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has confirmed that La Nina conditions have emerged in the last month, and that, quote, forecaster consensus also anticipates La Nina to continue through the winter, unquote. So as you know, planning staff has been anticipating that 2022 may be another dry year, and our available water supplies have been optimized in preparation. For example, we've returned bank supplies in semi-tropic, which we can either return for groundwater recharge later this year or carry over to San Luis Reservoir for next year. As this is the first board meeting of the new water year, which started October 1st, I wanted to take a little time at this point to discuss in detail the current projections for our water supplies by source. And I'll start with the State Water Project. As you know, their largest storage reservoirs are extremely low. In addition to the critically dry conditions this year, the State Water Board has instituted curtailments for water rights in the Delta watershed, including for the Department of Water Resources. Just as a reminder, when curtailments are in place, affected water rights holders would not be allowed to impound or divert new water, but they could make use of water that was already in storage prior to the curtailment. The State Water Board also has a process to allow for some exceptions, such as minimum health and safety requirements. Now, with that as a backdrop, it's not surprising that DWR indicated an increased likelihood that any early 2022 potential allocation will be small. For our own planning purposes, we are assuming that we could start with a 0% initial allocation as early as December. We did experience a period of time, less than a year, during the last drought, where DWR had reduced State Water Project allocations down to 0%. To be clear, while under 0% Table A allocation, ACWD would not get any new water allocated to us, but that does not affect our supplies already stored in the system. We all have learned some lessons from our experience of a 0% allocation in the last drought, And contractors like us are in close coordination with DWR this time around to prioritize movement of currently stored supplies throughout the system. While DWR's top priorities are for providing for minimum health and safety needs, protecting the Delta water quality, providing required environmental needs, and conserve storage for future needs, I'm happy to report that DWR is working with contractors to prioritize the delivery of those supplies that contractors already have held in storage. District staff have optimized our semi-tropic returns in 2021 to preserve that carryover water in San Luis for this very scenario. We're working closely with DWR as they evaluate how to operate the system in a way to deliver our San Luis and semi-tropic stored supplies. Next is the regional water system, imported supplies from the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, SFPUC. Those supplies mostly originate in the Tuolumne River watershed, and SFPUC is also under curtailment that not only limits their impoundment of new inflows on the Tuolumne River, but also effectively cuts off their ability to access about 360,000 acre feet of storage they have in Don Pedro under their water bank arrangement. Given those constraints, and in conformance with the water board processes to seek an exception from full curtailment to provide for minimum health and safety needs, SFPUC plans to seek an emergency declaration from their commission as early as November 9th. In doing so, SFPUC sets forth a process under their water supply agreement with wholesale customers that apportions available supplies between the retail and wholesale customers of the regional water system. SFPUC has stated their intention is to start with a voluntary 10% water use reduction, but they left the door open to move to stricter targets if conditions warrant. For our planning purposes, we are evaluating 10% reductions from our purchases. And we are engaging with SFPUC and BOSCA to better understand how SFPUC actions may affect our supply availability next year, as this would be the first time implementing those water shortage provisions in the contract. And lastly, we have local supplies. Our local precipitation last year, as I mentioned, was our second driest year, capping the second driest 2-year stretch on record. While we expect to get some rain this winter, we know the watershed is starting off very dry. And for planning purposes, we expect to use our groundwater supplies to make up the balance between 2022 customer demands and our imported supplies. Next slide, please. Now, this slide shows our above Hayward Fault, or AHF. This subbasin is located east of the Hayward Fault and presently has a water elevation of 29.9 feet. It is in very healthy condition storage-wise, with water levels right at the center of normal operating levels. Next slide, please. And this slide shows our below Hayward Fault, or BHF subbasin. This subbasin is located west of the Hayward Fault, and it connects with the San Francisco Bay, so water placed there is subject to saline outflow. Our current water elevation in BHF this week is 7.4 feet. And while that is below normal conditions, our groundwater resources can provide necessary local supplies if we experience a third critically dry year. Next slide, please. So now that we've reviewed our water supply conditions heading into 2022, I wanted to highlight our planning activities. We are fortunate to have a diverse water supply portfolio, and all 3 of our water supply sources are anticipated to contribute to meeting our 2022 demands, which we have to watch each of them closely to determine whether any future decreases in water availability would result in a shortage that could trigger additional actions, such as a water shortage emergency declaration, as described in our water shortage contingency plan. We are in close coordination with DWR and SFPUC as we watch their 2022 planning and water supply allocations. If we see any critical developments in the water supply availability from either of those imported supplies, that could trigger a water shortage. To my second bullet, we're monitoring for any state actions. During the last drought, we did see the state step in to establish mandatory conservation targets. And any such action by the state to impose mandatory conservation this time may be another trigger for implementing the water shortage contingency plan. Staff is making additional preparations, such as expanded conservation programs and public messaging, to achieve the 15% conservation requested by the governor. And staff has drafted a drought ordinance in preparation of any need to recommend additional action by the board. And now to discuss outreach efforts is our Public Affairs Supervisor, Ms. Shireen Gonzalez.
Mr. Ash, could you take a question quickly before we move on?
Yes, Director Sethi.
So I understand where BOSCA and SFPUC are targeting their 10% reductions across the Hetch Hetchy customers. But if we continue to be on 5%, even potentially a 0% allocation on the state water project, what is the prospect of us being able to purchase more water from Hetch Hetchy, especially considering our blending needs for the hardness of water, softness of water?
That's right. So Director Sethi, that's a good question. And staff is currently engaged with SFPUC staff and with BOSCA staff. We've made our particular situation known with regards to our need for blending and the availability of our other supplies, such as the potential of a very low or 0% allocation from our state water project. And as a result of those discussions, we're going to continue to evaluate how we may be able to garner additional supplies or whether there's any flexibility in the system to allow for us to go beyond or not quite achieve that 10% reduction. So this is relatively new information, and we're just beginning those discussions with SFPUC and BOSCA. But at least at the moment, with a 10% voluntary step that the PUC is proposing, there is some additional float, they call it, some additional supplies that are available if needed. And ACWD would not be the only wholesale customer who would have extenuating circumstances that need to be taken into consideration. So those conversations are ongoing.
Well, I'm just thinking that by necessity, we may not be able to achieve the 10% reduction because of our blending requirements and our softness, hardness targets, and that we may in fact be purchasing in excess of our normal requirements simply because 40% of our water supply is disappearing on us.
Yes.
I think the community needs to understand that the state water project is 40%. And we've been living with 5% of that 40% the past year, and it may continue into another year where we could become very highly dependent upon Hetch Hetchy extra deliveries.
That's right. And staff is engaging with the PUC to make those needs known.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll add that I've had a couple of discussions now with the assistant general manager at SFPUC on the water side, and made it really clear that with ACWD's reductions in state supply, which I agree, Director Sethi, are likely to be even further reduced in the near term, that definitely puts additional stress on our supplies and additional reliance on San Francisco, not only for aesthetic water quality purposes, but also, as you know, we have our PFAS blending that we do. And so it's important from for a number of reasons, from a supply standpoint, from a quality standpoint. I've been assured that we're going to be okay. However, with that declaration that the SFPUC is going to make soon, that will, require that we get pretty creative. Certainly, exchanges amongst BOSCA members are part of what San Francisco is suggesting is a possibility. And so we're looking at lots of different avenues to try and ensure that we're going to be okay. And so I applaud the hard work that our water resources staff are doing every day to try and make sure that we'll be okay. But the message to our customers, I think, is the drought is real and conservation is very important. And it's likely that it'll become even more important in the very near future.
Thank you. John Weed, if I might follow up at this point before we go into the conservation and message outreach. My understanding is that DWR is developing a program on emergency water storage due to the drought. And might that lead to the ability to park semi-tropic and other water that's coming to water of ACWD at Del Valle Reservoir?
So Director Weed, I'm not familiar with the particular program you're referencing. We are in discussions with DWR about how we can move water, such as our semi-tropic bank storage. And right now we're discussing various options that may provide some near-term solutions as well as potentially some long-term solutions as well. As for parking water in Lake Del Valle, currently that reservoir is not structured within DWR to allocate water stored on behalf of any particular contractor. So the water that's in Lake Del Valle is at DWR's discretion for supply to the South Bay contractors, but it's not earmarked per se to any particular agency. It's just, if you will, inline storage with the South Bay Aqueduct.
Well, we currently have local runoff of 15,000 acre feet. There is clearly the potential for being able to use Del Valle as a reservoir, particularly in lieu of Los Vaqueros, which won't be online for another dozen years, but that's there now. And I would encourage you to work with DWR to make Del Valle a primary water supply source, permanent water supply source for state water that we can count on and budget. In fact, attending the Bosca meetings in San Francisco, they have some potential major concerns. They've lost the water bank at Don Pedro unless they can get an emergency relief. As a result, they could be out of water supply by the end of next year, 2022, and down below their delivery capabilities. But that triggers a process which was put into the last water supply agreement, which would require a range of cutbacks on Hetch Hetchy water from 7% to 26%. 7% at East Palo Alto, 26% for Santa Clara, San Jose, and La Prisma. We're somewhere in that range. I don't know if it's a 10%, might be a higher percentage. Be a question. And what it truly intrigues me, since we are going into this in much better shape than we did at the last drought, when we drained the groundwater basin in order to work on fish ladders and rubber dams. So we haven't shot ourselves in the foot this time as badly as we did last time. So we'll see what happens. We were able to get emergency transfers from federal water, paper water from Contra Costa. Santa Clara has the ability to bring 75,000 acre feet of federal water through the South Bay Aqueduct each year, if they can find it. So there's some options out there, and we're willing to pay 100 times more than the farmers for that water. So if it goes into a market rate, we can certainly hopefully get be able to buy our way out of this. So thank you.
This is Director Sethi. I have another comment. I was going to leave it to director's comments at the end of the meeting, but it's worthwhile bringing up here. Mr. Ash and to Ms. Heides too. Last week was the Aqua Water Management Committee that I sit on, and we had a briefing from DWR, which was about a half an hour at the beginning of the meeting. I think you can access the presentation for that. It was the first time that DWR brought up the concept of what they call terminal emergency supply storage in reference to reoperation of smaller reservoirs across the state of California. There were questions asked by other committee members, and then I specifically asked about the long-term viability of permanently reoperating Lake Del Valle at a higher supply level. And the gentleman, I believe his name is Dan Krojcek or something like that, indicated that he is in meetings every other month with our South Bay contractors, I'm assuming with you, and that this is being discussed. And in terms of a 2022 year extended drought, that this is seriously on the table for discussion. So I was glad to hear that. And I think it requires follow-up from staff. My only concern is that they're moving at a slog's pace right now. And instead of meeting every other month, they really should be meeting with the South Bay contractors every other week before we go into 2022. So again, the new term that came up for the first time in all of these meetings with DWR was Terminal Emergency Supply Storage, TESS, in reference to reoperation of smaller reservoirs across the state to help with the supply needs for a third-year drought. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sethi. And I know we do have multiple staff participating in multiple meetings with DWR. And per the board's direction, we have been advocating for a critical look at how they operate Lake Del Valle, especially in times like this, to the benefit of their customers. So I'm glad to hear that there's that program that they're evaluating, and staff would be happy to continue coordinating with DWR on that program.
Well, you know, we've talked about expansion of operations at Lake Del Valle extensively, but the very simple thing that we could do in the short term that wouldn't require a lot of work is just to get the 3 South Bay contractors to agree to pay DWR for the cost of lowering the intake so we can have another 15,000 acre feet of water. And critically right now, Santa Clara, having drained Lake Anderson, you know, I think would be willing to help share in that cost, because they're running into an emergency situation right now too. And so just by lowering the intake, which might cost us, you know, $2 to $5 million, that frees up 15,000 acre feet of water without raising the elevation of the reservoir. And I think that's the first simple step that all of us can take together. That's in the interest of all 3 South Bay contractors.
If I could add on to that, I believe Director Sethi has added a 0 to the cost of putting the intake to the water treatment facility, a fraction of 1 MGD that the state of California recently refurbished for East Bay Regional Park District near the bottom of the reservoir. So it's a nominal cost for 15,000 acre feet of active warehouse storage, in addition to the 15,000 acre feet that we currently share with Zone 7. And if you wanted to park another 50,000 acre feet or 40,000 acre feet of water, you could do so and reimburse East Bay Regional Park District for a few $1 million. So when they rebuilt their visitor center for the 4th time, they might do it at a different location above the high water mark. So there are extraordinary opportunities there that are already built and plumbed. And we're looking at $100 million for Los Vaqueros to replicate something that we already have in hand. It's amazing. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think if there's no more questions, we can move on to the public outreach slide. Great. Shireen?
Great. Thank you, Ms. Heides. Good evening, board, staff, and members of the public. So I would like to touch on our increased public outreach for drought messaging and our One Saves Water campaign. As you may recall, back in May of this year, we presented to the board our One Saves Water campaign to begin and launch our drought messaging. And we've been moving full speed ahead ever since, and we've increased our outreach. Most recently with our Google and Facebook ads. This is digital media, and this is geo-targeted. So we are hitting audiences within the Tri-Cities, Fremont, Newark, and Union City to really increase and amplify our message with regard to drought outreach and encouraging our customers to continue their conservation, and with that voluntary 15% conservation ask. Also, we are in the process of developing a postcard mailer that we hope to get out within the next 7 to 10 business days, hitting mailboxes for our customers. Again, really hitting home that message, the importance of conserving water, working together as a community, one saves water, and preparing for the future. Also, our water use efficiency staff have been active in meeting with our stakeholders, cities, schools, and other partner agencies to not only share information about our current conservation efforts, but also offer resources as well as provide information regarding next steps if drought conditions should worsen. And in preparation of our lobby reopening on October 4th, we did revamp our Drought Resource Center in the lobby of our headquarters, as well as make available signs, drought signs, which you may be familiar with. If you are not already, you can pick one up in our lobby, or I can make one available for you. But we've been working also with our partners, each of the cities, City of Fremont, Newark, and Union City Parks Department, to make these drought yard signs available. And we've also been working with East Bay Regional Park District to make them available throughout Quarry Lakes along Alameda Creek. And they are also proudly displayed in front of district facilities. Regarding, just to kind of touch on our previous and ongoing outreach for our One Saves Water campaign, we have developed fact sheets. We have general fact sheets for general audiences, as well as fact sheets specific for businesses. Those are commercial, industrial, and institutional customers, homeowners associations, and apartment complexes. Also, we continue with our social media outreach. This has been ongoing, and we've really worked hard to work with agency partners as well as individuals throughout the Tri-Cities to amplify our message of working together as a community. At the launch of the campaign, we did issue a news release, and we've followed up with a subsequent news release, just advising our community that we are prepared should drought conditions worsen. We have weekly ads in the Tri-City Voice, and we continue with not only our One Saves Water message and drought message, but we also have been promoting our water conservation programs, our water efficiency landscape rebate program, as well as our landscape workshops. We've also done outreach to our stakeholders. We have a stakeholder list of over 200 members. So those are key decision makers and influencers, and we've shared information regarding our campaign and asked them to share our drought messaging and information and resources with their folks as well. We currently have a bill message as well as a bill insert in distribution. Now that bill insert is a two-sided insert. On one side, we have our One Saves Water message, letting our customers know that that conservation of 15% can be easily achieved by simple actions. And then the other side of that bill insert includes information on our water efficient landscape rebate program, where customers can receive a rebate up to $2 per square foot. In August, we launched our ACWD Aqueduct newsletter, which was a special drought edition. So it included not only information about the importance of conservation and that 15% savings that we are requesting, but also included some frequently asked questions that we often get from our customers, as well as resources available to our customers to let them know about ways that they can save and that we have what we have available. Additionally, we've had drought town hall meetings in which staff and President Akbari have been participants of, with Assembly Member Lee, Supervisor David Halbert, and the League of Women Voters. And also just a couple of additional items that I wanted to touch on. We do have video PSAs airing with UCTV Channel 15 through the City of Union City. And we also have articles in the Fremont Age-Friendly newsletter, as well as the Fremont Green Challenge newsletter. And of course, we will continue our outreach and evaluate and adjust as needed. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Megan Moreno, Water Use Efficiency Specialist. Ms. Moreno?
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Good evening, everyone. As predicted, with all this increased outreach and general awareness about drought, there's been an increase in water use efficiency programming and offerings to our customers. So in this slide, you can see average weekly activity on our water use efficiency measures by month compared to pre-drought. So in August, you can see an increase in water conservation kits. In September, we had an increase in water waste reports. And in October, it is a little bit too soon to tell how activity will shape out. And we will be watching that throughout the rest of the month, but it's still very much, much more activity than pre-drought. Next slide, please. So we've also expanded several programs to sort of sweeten the deal for customers to really engage in conservation. We've added new leak services to our Water Savings Assistance Partnership Program that just began the beginning of this month. We've updated our water waste process. We've expanded water conservation kits eligibility and device distribution. And this fall season for our landscape workshop series will be focused on dry conditions and how to manage your landscape in drought conditions while keeping your trees alive. And finally, we've fast-tracked some of the water efficiency master planning effort measures, including the outdoor residential water use survey measure. Next slide, please. In preparation for extreme conditions or shortage, we have prepared a potential water shortage emergency declaration. Staff led by Water Conservation Supervisor Stephanie Nevins has created a draft mandatory conservation ordinance. And this is very similar to the one that was approved in 2014. And this would range between a 10 and 20% mandatory reduction in demand. And so things to do to achieve that would be to minimize landscape irrigation, but maintain landscape viability, such as watering your trees for shade, minimizing water waste, and restricting other non-essential uses. So again, this is very similar to the water waste ordinance that was passed in the previous drought. So we are familiar for organizing this and enforcing it. Next steps, it's draft right now, so we're having legal review it. And once that draft is finalized, we'll have the board have a preview for its consideration. Next step would be to prepare a public hearing and follow posting requirements. And then finally, if necessary, we would ask the board to vote and adopt it after the public hearing. So those are the kind of things that we're preparing for if should conditions get to a shortage emergency. Next, I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Ash to continue discussing demand.
Thank you, Ms. Moreno. Our penultimate slide here provides the latest update on how customer demands are tracking with the governor's call for a 15% voluntary reduction in water use. So the orange line here shows 2020 demands, and that's the baseline from which we're called to conserve 15%. The dashed purple line shows what demands we expect if we achieved a 15% reduction. Calendar year 2021 demands are shown in red through October 1st. Demands are decreasing, to be sure, although we have more work to do to realize that 15% reduction. And lastly, for comparison, the light gray line represents our 2015 demands at the height of the last drought, which indicates that a 15% reduction is within our reach, as we've been able to achieve even greater water use efficiency in the past. Next slide, please. And now I'll close by highlighting our next steps. So staff will continue to monitor supplies, conditions, and state actions. As I mentioned, we'll keep watch for those triggers, either a state action or critical developments in the availability of either of our two imported water supplies. Secondly, staff will continue preparations for potential emergency shortage declaration and ordinance. Staff's committed to monthly updates, both at the Water Resources and Conservation Committee and to the full board. And lastly, staff will continue enhancements to public outreach. For example, evaluating our digital outreach, expanding outreach efforts such as additional mailers, events, and partnerships for messaging, and adjusting as necessary as drought conditions evolve. And with that, I want to thank you for your time, and staff would be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Let me first open it up to the board and see if there are any directors with questions or comments.
I'll make a comment. Something that we need to address at some point is to come up with a chart that shows the financial impact to the district if we do achieve the type of reduction in sales we're talking about. We're leveraged up to when we do water, we did very well, putting about $50 million a year in the bank the last several years, but that will quickly flip upside down. So knowing what that financial impact is going to be would be helpful to for ourselves and I think the public. Thank you.
Director Gunther, I'd like to thank the staff. It's not a pretty picture, but we've been there before and we could do it again, I think. Hopefully things will get a little bit better. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from directors? Otherwise, I'll open it up to members of the public. Any members of the public with any questions or comments? Hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Ash and Ms. Marino, for the presentation. I believe that concludes that item, unless you guys had anything else to round out the presentation.
No, I think that's all from staff on that presentation, President Akbari.
Okay, wonderful. Great. I think we are 6.3.3, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act Alternative Update Preview. And I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Stevenson.
Thanks, President Akbari. Just a quick time check. As a reminder, we have a public hearing that we want to try and start as close to 8 o'clock as we can. We think we can do it with a relatively brisk review of this particular presentation and maybe leave a few minutes for a quick break before that public hearing. But to get us started with this topic, again, Director of Water Resources, Laura Hydas.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Tonight, staff's here to share a preview of the district's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act alternative update that will be submitted to the Department of Water Resources by the end of this year. I'm pleased to introduce our three speakers today: Senior Engineer Mike Hallowell, Hydrogeologist Ava Laser, and Groundwater Resources Manager Michelle Myers. We'd like to just begin by kicking off this presentation. So I will turn it over to Ms. Myers.
Thank you, Ms. Hydas. I'm going to hop right into it. So slides 1 through 6 are general background materials. So unless there are questions or comments from the board on these slides, I'll skip to slide 7. Very good. All right, I'm going to keep going. So July's workshop goals were to share progress on the district's alternative update, groundwater model upgrade, and addressing DWR's recommended actions provided as part of our approved alternative. There were 7 recommendations from DWR, and 4 of the 7 were discussed during the July workshop and are shown on this slide. Next slide, please. The 3 recommendations to consolidate, clarify, and improve discussions were not covered during the July workshop, but will be discussed today. And they're also shown on this slide, which is to organize and consolidate our submitted materials, provide additional explanation of how management of the gradient of the Newark Aquifer impacts the Centerville, Fremont, and deep aquifers, and an improved discussion related to the representative monitoring sites, basically evaluating our monitoring network and use of the district's indicator wells. Next slide. The district has been managing and protecting the Niles cone for over a century. As a result, the district has a number of planning and operational documents, policies under which it manages the Niles cone. DWR requested that ACWD organize and consolidate the information from various documents to generally follow the elements of Article 5 of the regulations. Basically, what it entails is capturing pertinent information from various documents into one single document. Staff has organized this information into the alternative update and has incorporated DWR's recommendations, for which a draft is expected to be released for public comment later this month. Next slide. This slide shows how staff has addressed the last two remaining recommended actions from DWR, which will be covered in more detail next by Mr. Hallowell. Then Ms. Laser will provide an update on work done so far for incorporating climate change projections and work anticipated to continue the next evaluation for the next evaluation for the next 5-year update, which would be in 2027. Next slide. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mr. Hallowell.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. DWR had requested more information to support our position that the Newark Aquifer Forebay Indicator well that we use for real-time decision-making is adequately representative of trends throughout the BHS subbasin, including the Central Fremont and Deep Aquifers. The hydrographs of Central Fremont and Deep Aquifer water levels are the lower two lines in orange and gray, and the hydrograph of Newark Aquifer levels is a blue line. Although the Central Fremont and Deep water levels frequently dip below sea level, they trend very nicely with the Newark Aquifer, which is above sea level. We can quantify the degree of correlation between the aquifers. Next slide, please. So let's look at the first row below the headings where it says Newark, with a 1.0 being a perfect correlation. The degree of correlation between the Newark Aquifer and Central Fremont is 0.85 and 0.79 between the Newark and Deep. Those are very good correlations. Under the district's contemporary operation of the basin, the Central Fremont and Deep aquifers are not vulnerable to new seawater intrusion simply because their water levels dip below sea level. Unlike the Newark Aquifer, the Central Fremont and Deep are not directly connected to San Francisco Bay. Therefore, inland areas of the Newark Aquifer would have to become brackish first before these aquifers receive substantial new seawater intrusion, under a reasonable presumption, of course, that most Savannah wells in the western part of the basin have it sealed. But DWR has asked us to back up this explanation. Next slide, please. As we know, maps in our monitoring report show regions of expansion of brackish water since 1962. In reality, we believe much of the expansion area either occurred decades ago or was old seawater intrusion that had not been known until we put in new monitoring wells. But the maps, when viewed out of context, may give the incorrect impression that the Central Fremont and Deep aquifers are presently in a state of new seawater intrusion. To show these brackish areas are actually stable or decreasing, we came up with statistics of chloride trends of all individual wells that have sufficient data within the last 10 years for trend analysis. Here's a trend line for one well in the Central Fremont showing a decrease. Now, for the March board presentation on this survey report, we will continue to estimate mass in the Central Fremont aquifer and then give a percentage of how far along we are to cleanup. But for this report in DWR, we want to make the case with solely on hard data. Next slide, please. So for each aquifer, we plotted trend coefficients for individual wells. They appear as numbers in black and are expressed in percentages, not part per million. Negative numbers represent decreasing trends and positive values, increasing ones. As you can see, there are a lot more negative values than positive ones. That's a good thing. Next slide, please. We then tabulated the number of wells with decreasing and those increasing in chloride and parsed the count by aquifer and concentration range. In each concentration range less than 10,000 ppm, that is inland of the salt ponds, we see an overwhelming majority of wells decreasing, including those in the Central Fremont and Deep aquifers. Next slide, please. Chloride in most of our wells is in the 150 to 10,000 ppm range, with 10,000 mostly in the Newark aquifer at the salt ponds and 150 being somewhat higher than what's in the recharge ponds. Within this wide group, about 82% have had 10-year decreasing trends. There is a minority of wells with that are increasing in chloride, but that's not surprising in a complicated basin like ours. There are plausible reasons for these exceptions, but the overwhelming majority of wells decreasing shows a basin that is improving in water quality, not just in the Newark aquifer, but also in the Central Fremont and Deep aquifer. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll now turn it over to Ms. Laser.
Great, thank you, Mr. Hallowell. I'm going to provide a status update on the incorporation of climate change projections into our alternative update. And as a brief reminder of what was presented in July, staff utilized DWR provided change factors to model 4 projected climate change scenarios plus one 2070 baseline scenario. Next slide, please. This is a visualization of the input precipitation data sets that were used for the 3 2070 scenarios. The red dotted line is the actual measured rainfall that we're using to develop our historical groundwater budget in the model. Next slide, please. Here is a visualization of how the IWFM model incorporated sea level rise. The figure on the left shows the bathymetric elevations or depth to bottom for the San Francisco Bay and salt ponds. And on the right is their measured surface water elevations, or generally sea level over time. These values were adjusted by the levels of assumed sea level rise for the future scenarios. So that's 0.8 feet for 2030 and 3.5 feet for 2070. And these are examples of boundary conditions that were used for the model, which create the basis for pressure-driven inflows to and outflows from our basin with the bay and adjacent water bodies. Next slide, please. Here's an illustration of the model elements for the San Francisco Bay and salt ponds, which were modeled as lakes in IWFM. We are modeling the flow exchanges between the Niles cone and these elements under the future climate simulations. And this is a plan view showing the boundaries between those elements in our adjacent groundwater basin. I'm now going to describe conceptually the sort of effect that sea level rise has on those flow exchanges, but in cross section. Next slide, please. This is a conceptualized cross-section of a groundwater basin. So that's to say not necessarily the Niles cone, but this particular groundwater basin is replenished by recharge ponds, which percolate into the unconfined aquifer beneath them. Water that is not captured by pumping will follow the blue arrow going left along some gradient or slope from one higher elevation to a lower elevation, which in this case is out to a coastal water body. The driving forces for this pressure-driven flow are groundwater levels in and near the recharge ponds, which are managed by aquifer recharge activities, and sea levels providing back pressure to outflow. Compare the situation before sea level rise to one where there has been sea level rise. The effect will be a relative decrease in slope, meaning outflow will not reach the coastal water body as quickly. Therefore, westward movement of a brackish waterfront may still proceed, but just more slowly. Now that we've been introduced to the input data sets and concepts, let's take a look at what the output groundwater levels look like from some model simulations. And just a reminder that this is a preliminary analysis of climate change scenarios based on data sets provided by DWR. And contemplation of future operations and refinements in our modeling tools will further improve this analysis. Next slide, please. This is a hydrograph for our AHF subbasin indicator well. It shows the simulated groundwater levels from the 2070 dry with extreme warming and 2070 baseline scenarios. Our current minimum groundwater level operating condition for the AHF aquifer is 15 feet. And based on the results of the simulation, we do not fall below that minimum operating condition. Next slide, please. Here's a hydrograph for our BHF subbasin indicator well, which reflects groundwater levels in our Newark aquifer under the same 2 scenarios as the previous graph. Our current minimum groundwater level operating condition is approximately -5 feet for the Newark aquifer. And based on the results of this simulation, our groundwater levels only very slightly dip below -5 feet for a period. At this point, I'll pass it back to Mr. Hallowell to discuss next steps for a sea level rise evaluation.
Thank you, Ms. Laser. As Ms. Laser alluded to, preliminary modeling predicted piezometric heads under 2070 conditions to be close to current operating ranges. The final hydrographs for the report, our alternative update report, may be slightly different as we are doing some final checks with another set of model runs, but those runs should tell the same story. After the 5-year update documents are submitted, our planned next steps will be to use the model to assist the Water Resources Planning Division in their efforts to update the Integrated Resources Plan, which in turn is slated to include a climate change adaptation plan. On the topic of climate change, we anticipate that rising sea levels will slow the outflow of legacy seawater intrusion from the Newark aquifer, but not cause significant resalination of the basin per se. Our new NEBMI model calculates saline inflow and outflow to San Francisco Bay in response to levels in the bay. But to give more confidence on how concentrations of chloride may change in the long-term future, we would consider an add-on effort using a solute transport model such as ModFlow coupled with MT3D. Such a model would be set up solely on the Niles cone, not on the entire NEBIM grid. But NEBIM would be run to provide the critical hydraulic inputs to the geographically smaller solute transport model. Next slide, please. Other possible next steps could include acquiring new data to answer lingering questions about groundwater dependent ecosystems and/or help refine parameters in the model. Finally, we could further consider the feasibility of modeling shallow groundwater perched over the Newark Aquifer, which we call the shallow water bearing zone. It was not practical to include it in NEBIM because it's not a regional aquifer. Its thickness and geographic extent are small compared to the regional aquifers modeled in NEBIM. But shallow groundwater may be affected by a rising sea level, so there may be some benefit to trying to model it. Potentially a shallow zone could be included in a solute transport model or simulated as a standalone model. So that concludes my part. So I'll turn the presentation back over to Ms. Myers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hallowell. Next steps, sorry, that's the next slide. All right, so near term next steps, we're going to continue implementing the alternative and continue stakeholder outreach and continue to coordinate with adjacent basins. We're meeting regularly with the adjacent basins to talk about alternatives and GSP development and all that fun stuff. And once again, the draft alternative update, we're looking to hit the street the end of October and then submit in January. And I just want to, I don't think anybody from DW or anybody else might be online, but we really appreciate all the coordination that we have going on with all of the adjacent agencies and their stakeholders in the basin that have been reaching out and having conversations with us. So that, next slide. Any questions?
Great. Thank you, Ms. Myers, Mr. Hallowell, and Ms. Laser. Let me open it up first for directors to ask any questions or take any comments.
I'll go and comment. Great report, a lot of effort. Sigma is not an easy topic. We just had one of the lawyer sessions yesterday. I was actually able to sit in on it, and some internet difficulties, but it's great to have a good staff working on this stuff. And we are really well ahead, I think, of a lot of the rest of the state with this, and it shows. Thanks a lot for the staff.
Any other questions or comments from members of the board? If not, let me open it up to members of the public for any questions or comments. Hearing none, well, I'll echo Director Gunther's comments. Very impressed by the work that's gone into this. Sigma's absolutely not easy to deal with. But appreciate you guys bringing this to the board and giving us an update tonight. Wonderful. I think we should take a short, let's say 5-minute break to give everyone some time to grab some water before we jump into our public hearing tonight. So let's reconvene at, let's say 8:02. Wonderful. It is 8:03 p.m. and we're reconvening. We will be moving to item 7, public hearing to receive public input on the transition from at-large to zone-based elections to create 5 zones for members of the board of directors pursuant to the California Voting Rights Act. On behalf of the board of directors, I'd like to welcome the public's participation in this evening's public hearing. The purpose of this hearing is to inform the public about the process to establish 5 zones or voting districts that are compliant with all voting laws and best practices, and to receive input from the public and stakeholders on what factors should be taken into consideration when creating the new voting zones. A second public hearing to receive and consider further input from the public concerning the composition of these zones is scheduled for a special board meeting on October 28th, 2021, that will begin at 4 p.m. that day. Following the conclusion of the first 2 public hearings, the district's demographers will create 1 or more draft maps based upon the process and factors to be presented this evening. There will be 3 additional public hearings to present the draft maps, potential election sequencing, and receive further public input. At the last public hearing, the board will consider the approval of a final map and election sequencing. The board welcomes your input on this important process, and again, thank you for your participation. Now, I'd like to review our ground rules for the public hearing tonight. I'll open the public hearing, and ACWD staff will make some brief remarks, followed by a presentation from the district's demographers, who will ultimately prepare the draft voting district maps to share with the board and the public to receive public comment. The presentation materials can be viewed online through the Zoom app, or can be accessed on the district's website with the agenda and materials for this meeting at www.acwd.org. Upon conclusion of the presentation, the board and the district's demographers will receive public comments and input. Upon conclusion of the public comments and input, the board will request input from staff, general counsel, and the district's demographers as needed to respond to questions or comments that were raised by the public, and then I will close the public hearing. Each person tonight will be given 5 minutes to comment. We'll require strict compliance with this time limit so that everyone is treated equally. The Assistant District Secretary will provide you with 30 seconds advance warning and will let you know when your time has expired. Since this hearing is being conducted online and by teleconference, persons who wish to make public comments can indicate by raising your hand in the Zoom app, submitting your comments or questions in the chat feature in the Zoom, or by speaking up verbally when we open the public comment portion of the hearing. When making public comments, please be sure to unmute your own phone line or computer microphone so that you may be heard. We ask that you please state your name and service address when making your comment, providing this information is, of course, though, voluntary. With that, I will open tonight's public hearing. Staff will now provide some brief remarks, followed by a presentation by the district's demographers. I ask you to please refrain from asking questions or making comments until we open up the public comment portion of the public hearing. And with that, I will turn it over to our general manager, Mr. Stevenson.
Great, thank you, President Akbari. And at this point, I'd invite our presenters to go ahead and load up their presentation. We can start sharing it. But I also just wanted to thank everyone for participating. I have a little bit of context to add before tonight's public hearing. So the Board of Directors are currently elected at large in accordance with the district's enabling legislation. Now, the California Voting Rights Act prohibits the use of at-large elections if it impairs the ability of a protected class to elect candidates of its choice or its ability to influence the outcome of an election. Numerous public agencies, including the district, have been contacted by private law firms alleging violations of the California Voting Rights Act in a push to move agencies toward district-based or zone-based election systems. While the district does not agree with those allegations, the board has begun the process of moving toward a zone-based election system. And on August 12, 2021, the board adopted a resolution of intention to move from at-large elections to zone-based elections. It is the district's intention through this process to establish 5 zones, which are compliant with all voting laws and best practices that ensure appropriate representation of the district's minority groups and the opportunity for minority groups to exercise effectively the electoral franchise, and which take into consideration topography, geography, cohesiveness, contiguity, integrity, and compactness of territory, non-disturbance of existing precincts, and maintain vital communities of interest. To do this, the district has engaged a demographer who will utilize the new 2020 federal census data in the process of drafting potential zones. Pursuant to Elections Code Section 10010, the district is required to hold at least 2 public hearings over a period of no more than 30 days before any map or maps of the boundaries of the proposed voting zones are drawn. So tonight's public hearing is the first of those 2 hearings. As President Akbari reported, the second public hearing is scheduled for October 28 at 4 p.m. Following these 2 first public hearings, the district's demographers will begin the process of creating 1 or more maps for presentation to the board and the public, and to receive additional public input through 3 additional public hearings. The district published notice of this public hearing on its website and social media in the East Bay Times on October 1 and October 8, and in the Tri-City Voice on October 5 and October 12. And as of 8 o'clock this evening, the district has not received any written comments. So at this time, I'd like to introduce the district's demographers, Shelley Lapkoff and Jean Gobelet of Lapkoff and Gobelet Demographic Research Incorporated, who will present the process and the factors involved in developing the zone maps and the input requested from the public through this process. So Jean and Shelley, it's all yours.
Yes, thank you. It's just me tonight, Shelley Lapkoff, and it's a pleasure to be here to give you some basic information and the public basic information about the transition, to help you transition to zone-based elections. I'm going to talk a little bit about the background, then the legal requirements as we implement them, discuss a little bit identifying communities of interest, because we'd love to hear from the public about communities of interest, and then end with how the public can get more information or provide comments. In terms of background, this is a little bit of a repeat, but the California Voting Rights Act has encouraged many jurisdictions to move from at-large to by district or zone elections. As such, Alameda County Water District received a letter from an attorney with a potential legal challenge if they did not move to by district elections. On August 12th, the board passed a resolution to transition to by district elections. Tonight's hearing is the first of 2 initial hearings. At these 2 initial hearings, we will not be showing any maps. The purpose is to educate the board and public and to take input from the public on factors to consider when we're drawing maps, in particular, what people believe their communities of interest are. Later, draft maps will be presented at the later hearings. Now, just to make sure everyone understands what we're doing tonight, we're changing from at-large election, which is everybody, all voters elect all board members. And that's the current system right now. Everybody votes for all board members, and board members can live anywhere within the district. When we change to by district elections, then the director is elected specifically from voters living in that election district, and the director must live in that election district themselves as well. So that's the change. And when we start drafting plans, we have to follow federal and state laws, which I'll explain in a minute. The current directors will complete their terms of office even if they do not live in the new zone that they are assigned to. But once the election comes up for that zone, then they would need to live in that zone, or they would need to run in the zone in which they live. But they will complete their terms of office. And these newly created zones continue until the next census, until 2030, after the 2030 census, and you will see if you need to change your election district boundaries at that time. Okay, here's a map of your district, the water district. It's in the bold black line. And I'd like to show you that you're basically almost all of Union City, Fremont, and Newark's population is within Alameda County Water District. There is parts of Union City that are outside the water district, but there's zero population in that part. There's a little part of Fremont in the hills that are that's outside the water district with a very small population. And you have territory of Hayward, but there is no population in that segment of of Hayward that's in the water district. And of course, all of Newark is within the district. And I've put in the population counts. So for example, Union City has a little over 70,000 people, Fremont over 230,000 people, and Newark, the smallest, at 47,570 people. So that's just a brief overview of the boundaries of the district and give you context for the cities within the district.
This is Director Sethi, Ms. Lapkoff.
Yes.
I believe if you look at our records, we actually do have customers in Hayward on the Union City border. It's a very small neighborhood. It's somewhere less than 35 people, I believe, but they are voters in our district and customers. And I think that Mr. Wunderlich, our finance director, has the addresses of those customers.
Okay, we will check, but what we have to go on for the purpose of districting is the actual census data. And our census data showed that there was no population, but maybe there are split blocks, or we will double check that. Thank you very much.
It's a very small neighborhood right on the border, and historically it's always been there. I don't know why.
Okay, yeah, we will check that with our data. It might be a split census block and we didn't realize to include it.
Well, Mr. Wunderlich has all the customers that are billed in that area.
Okay, great. We will check that out and report back by the next public hearing. And then the census data provides the demographic. Excuse me. The census data is what I'm presenting in this next slide. You have the total population and the percent of the population by race ethnicity. So first off, you have 348,283 people as counted by the census. And a vast majority of those people are of Asian descent. Hispanic and whites make up 17 and 16% of the total population. Blacks 3%, and all others another 3%. Sometimes we look at the 18 plus population because that's the population that is eligible to vote. And we have similar percentages with the 18 plus population. I next have a slide that shows the race ethnicity distribution within the water district. The size of the pies indicate the number of people in each block, in each census block, and then the color of the pie shows you the race ethnicity of the population, with the light blue color being Asians, which are the dominant race ethnicity in the district. Hispanics are a dark blue, non-Hispanic whites are green. And one thing to note, you see a concentration of Hispanic Latinx population here in Union City, and also somewhat in Newark. So that may be a community of interest that we would want to pay special attention to. Now I'd like to go over some of the laws that we have to follow. There are federal laws and state laws. The federal law, there's population equality, first and foremost, that the zones need to be relatively equal in total population as counted by the census. And I'll go over that a little bit more. Then there's the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and amended. And that's basically to ensure that protected race, ethnic, language groups, in this case, Asians and Hispanic Latino groups, would have the ability to elect representatives of their choice if they are numerous enough. And then in the early 90s, the Supreme Court ruled that there should not be racial gerrymandering. And basically, in the early 1990s, before the Supreme Court ruling, we were maximizing the political power of the protected minority groups. And the Supreme Court said that that was not appropriate. And so it's a bit of a balancing act for demographers. We need to take into account the protected minority groups, but on the other hand, we can't create bizarrely shaped districts just to do that. And then I'll also discuss the elections code in a minute. So let's go through the population balance so you understand how that works. The total population of Alameda County Water District is 348,283 persons. The number of zones is 5. So the ideal population would be 1/5 of 348,283, which is 69,657 people. So that's what we're aiming for when we draw zones. But we are allowed some leeway, and we're allowed a 10% deviation from the ideal district size. And that deviation is the difference between the least and most populous district. So essentially we have a little under 7,000 people that can vary between the least and most populous district. So when we come back with plans, we will shoot for as close to 69,657 that we can get while meeting the other criteria as well. Now I want to talk a minute about the Federal Voting Rights Act. The idea is that single member election districts should be drawn so that members of protected groups have the ability to elect representatives of their choice if the protected group is sufficiently large and geographically compact to form a majority in a single member district, and if that group is politically cohesive. And here's diagrams of what not to do. And in a court case, it was called cracking and packing. But basically, it's that you should not divide minority communities and you should not overly concentrate them. So the top diagram shows minority districts that are split by the election districts or the zones. And that would make the minority groups unable to influence the election in their districts. On the bottom diagram, you see that the minority groups are overly concentrated. And so now, instead of having the ability to elect 2 representatives from 2 different districts, or at least have some influence, they are just in one, they're only able to influence 1 electorate. So the next slide shows what ideally would happen is that the minority voter group would be together and they would be in separate districts if they're large enough to influence and elect representatives of their choice. So as we draw plans, we will look for concentrations of minority voters to make sure that we do not divide them or overly pack them. And this is a little bit of history from 1993. This is the Supreme Court case where in North Carolina, the African-American population they were trying to maximize their political power, and they went along a freeway, and this whole red area is one district. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't draw districts like that just for the sake of maximizing the political power of the protected minority group. Now I want to turn to the state elections code and the factors that we have been told to consider are topography, geography, cohesiveness, contiguity, integrity, and compactness of territory, as well as communities of interest. And as we draw the lines, we want to take into account these factors. Now, communities of interest have gotten more important in this decade of redistricting and districting, and they've been defined as a group of people that share social and economic interests and should be in a single election district because their community of interest may be affected by the policies of the jurisdiction, in this case, the water district. So the question we would ask residents, what is your community of interest? And a second question, if you have a community of interest, do you want to be united in one election district? And usually that's the case, but occasionally they actually want to be divided so that they have a voice in the elections of multiple representatives. Here's some examples of communities of interest. I think probably the most common is recognized neighborhoods, maybe subdivisions. People often are geographically connected to their neighborhood. Also cities and unincorporated communities. So in your case, Newark and Union City may be considered a community of interest. Areas with similar demographic characteristics. I pointed out that area in Union City and also in Newark that had a concentration of Latino population, and that might be considered a community of interest. Areas with similar issues and even other jurisdictional boundaries like school attendance areas. And we want to remind the public and the board that there are many different factors to take into account, and it's very difficult to optimize everything simultaneously. We will do our best, but one of the things that we like to do is when we compare districting scenarios or plans, we like to tell you what these trade-offs are so that you can weight them as you see fit. For more information, the district has set up a website page on this districting task, moving to zone-based election system. So you can go onto the website and get more information there. And you can submit questions or comments to the district, to Jennifer Solito, and I have her email here on this slide. And that concludes my presentation for tonight.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lapkov. I will now open the public comment portion of the hearing. As a reminder, anyone who would like to make public comments can do so by raising their hand in the Zoom app, submitting your comments or questions in the chat feature in Zoom, or by speaking up verbally when invited to do so. And I'll just ask the Assistant District Secretary to please make sure that everyone has the ability to unmute so they can make their public comments. And I do see we have a hand raised already from Mr. Kelly A. Mr. Kelly A.
Thank you. I've been to a lot of redistricting presentations. I'm with a group that's focused on county redistricting called the Alameda County Coalition for Fair Redistricting, but we're not doing special districts. So I'm speaking on behalf of myself. These redistricting consultants that you've got today, They're top notch. They're a lot more clear, a lot more understandable than other agency staff and other people's consultants. Other people have brought in independent consultants too, and they drown you in stuff about population balance, about race and ethnicity, and they get so people get so focused in, zeroed in on population balance, and then the next conclusion, once you get that locked in your mind that you need population balance, you bring out the old district maps, which luckily you don't have any, and you show that you're still in balance because everybody has grown evenly. The districts are very well balanced now, and this is what other districts do. And therefore, the natural conclusion is, well, we only need to do minor tweaks, just a few little tweaks, maybe nothing, because we're already very, very perfect, very fine right now. They also bring in another tactic that people will do, is they'll bring in sock puppet maps from their own staff. They claim that their staff is independent, but it's not really. They'll have their political allies pose as independent citizens groups and bring in all kinds of maps that just happen to serve the political interests of the incumbents. Problem with all that is that there's this new law, AB 895, the Fair Maps Act, which doesn't apply to you, but it is used as a best practice for a lot of special districts. And what does that do? Well, especially for cities and counties that actually do have to comply with that, when they do packing of the African-American population in East Oakland and cram them all into one district very neatly by drawing a line around them, that's not really allowed anymore. When they have pockets and enclaves in Oakland, that's certainly not allowed anymore. When they have a water district in Oakland, they have discontiguous separated zones where they've split off a piece of San Ramon and combined it with a separate zone out in Castro Valley, separated by empty gaps of empty space. And they haven't really acknowledged that as a problem. It is a problem. The city of Fremont, for example, has separated two incumbents, covered it up with an elaborate explanation about keeping an Asian group together. But if you talk to that group, and I have, they disclaimed any knowledge of that plan to preserve their interests. So it's a strange, but everyone believes in that explanation, but except for the people who were supposed to be protected. So it looks like your process is off to a great start. One of the other water districts actually put up a rule which may be legal, but it's certainly questionable, which, and I would urge you not to do this. They put up as one of their top rules, guidelines, that the incumbent precincts would remain fixed in their current wards, or so the incumbent residents would not move, and you would build a ward around their current residents. And that's obviously a very self-serving and incumbent protection feature, which I would urge you not to do. And another thing that people do is they pay lip service to keeping cities together. And in this case, it seems like Newark and Union City are each big enough or small enough to almost fit in a district all by themselves. So that almost gives you two districts automatically right there, Newark and Union City. 50,000 people and 75,000 people off the top of my head. So those would almost work.
Mr. Kellier, you have 30 seconds remaining.
You almost are forced to use those two. But there's this idea that, oh, we can we're going to keep cities together, but at the same time, it's good to be divided because you'll have two directors. These are two different ideas. All in all, I think you're going to have, it seems like your process is very fair and very well, seems to be very well run with these consultants you have. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a comment at this point? Mr. Cannon.
Thank you, members of the board. To begin, I do not believe that the customers of ACWD have been negatively impacted by at-large voting. However, given the circumstances, I support the board's decision to transition to zone-based elections. Apart from the legally mandated requirements to comply with the Federal and California Voting Rights Act as they pertain to the protected classes, topography, geography, cohesiveness, and communities of interest have been stated as criteria for determining the zone boundaries. I would like the board to consider the following as inputs when considering communities of interest. First, perhaps the function of the board, which is most visible and impactful to the customers and voters, is the rate setting process. The sensitivity to and ability to handle increases to water rates differs according to one's socioeconomic status. As such, the socioeconomic demographics is a factor to consider as a community of interest when drawing zone boundaries. A second factor to consider is that water quality, for example, hardness, is not equally distributed. Not all customers receive the same water. Rather, depending on where one receives service, hardness varies considerably. Excessive hardness reduces service life of plumbing equipment and reduces efficiency of detergents, raising costs for those who receive hard water. Therefore, aligning zones to capture these disparities is another potential factor to consider when drawing boundaries. To be clear, the previous comment is not intended to imply that the district provides unsafe water to any of its customers. I am confident that the district meets or exceeds all federal and state standards for safe drinking water for all its customers, regardless of geography. The last factor I'd like to bring to attention today is infrastructure, specifically the probability of damage due to natural disaster. The impact of an earthquake on the district will not be distributed equally across the district. Interests of those in certain geographic areas may differ from those in other areas. Thus, consideration of common interest in infrastructure improvements could be considered as a factor in setting zone boundaries. Finally, it would be interesting to compare the results of this process versus the zones for a very similarly situated district, the Union Sanitary District, whose service area is roughly congruent with that of ACWD. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Kennan. Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a comment at this time? Hearing none, and I see no hands raised in the Zoom app. Let me ask the Assistant District Secretary, have we received any written comments?
We have not received any written comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. With that, I will move to the board. Does any director have any questions of staff, general counsel, our demographers, or other directors based on the comments that we've received tonight?
I'll throw one out, John Lee. There's been discussions in the past of various other agencies drawing up boundaries within an area. And one of the philosophies has been that you did not want to have a nest of districts of different types that had the similar boundaries because they lost some of the political interaction between the groups. But will that be, will there be other districts in our area going through the same process, the same timeline? Community College, Union Sanitary District, Unified School District, and drawing up their boundaries. And should that be a consideration in our decisions? Just a question to our consultant.
Should I answer that then? Is that appropriate for me?
I believe so.
I think that's fine, yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question. It certainly helps the register of voters if these election districts are similar to one another. And it sometimes helps the voters as well. The problem is that everybody is in the middle of changing their election districts right now. And so everything is in flux. So I don't know if we can really coordinate very easily. But let me ask you, which community college is it, I guess it's, is it Parata Community College? That would be
No, it's the Ohlone Community College District covers
Ohlone.
Fremont, Newark, and a portion of Union City, based on some of the
Okay.
coastal
Yeah.
routes.
Yeah,
Union Sanitary District's almost the same. The city, each of the cities will be going into their own elections, but particularly for Fremont, we'll know where their
Right.
boundaries are. So,
right, yeah. Well, it's something we can look into. I'm just not sure that we will be able to use it because they may be changing right now too. Everybody's sort of changing at the same time. If we're a little later in the process, then they may have theirs established already.
the others are the Board of Supervisors, District 1 and 2,
Mhm.
and the State Assembly, which splits the district.
Mhm. Yeah, they have to be done quite early.
Hi, hi, this is Director Sethi. Thank you for that really nice presentation, Ms. Labkoff. I have a couple of questions. Maybe you can't answer it, but I'll leave it for Mr. Stevenson to look into. Union Sanitary has 5 directors, 1 for Union City, 1 for Newark, and 3 for Fremont. The Union City population is almost half of the other 4 districts for their board. Are they having to go through the same kind of redrawing of maps right now to meet the
Yeah, I
voting
believe
rights
they
act?
are going through a redistricting process right now too.
They are. So it has to be more balanced. So we might have a seat that's Newark plus Fremont.
It's possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I noted to Mr. Stevenson, and I forgot to send it out. It's there was a report earlier this week. I'm not sure if you saw it, Ms. Lapkoff. It came out from UC Berkeley, the Othering and Belonging Institute. It's entitled "The Most Segregated Cities and Neighborhoods in the San Francisco Bay Area: The 2020 Census Update." And the email address for it is belonging@Berkeley.edu. Belonging, just like you would spell it, at berkeley.edu. And it's a very interesting report, and Fremont and Union City are highlighted. Newark is not. I think because they were focused on the larger population areas, but Fremont and Union City are called out as 2 of the most segregated cities in the Bay Area. And you will see others like Marin County that are nearly all white. San Rafael is all white except for what they call the Canal neighborhood, which is 90% Hispanic. The Bay Area is very divided. But Fremont, notably, as the 4th largest city in the Bay Area, was noted as being one of the most segregated cities in the Bay Area. It's well worth reading. Number 2, I'm really concerned about communities of interest, and in reading the early 2020 census data, it seems like the number that you have that's close to 70,000, approximately, just under 70,000, would be equal districts. And the early population numbers from Union City are just above that. So I think that Union City all by itself could be one district in its entirety that is within the comfort zone of the numbers you've come up with. And when I look at your map of where we have areas of Hispanic concentration in Newark, it seems to be that it best matches the very center of Fremont, right across demographically, income-wise, the school district boundary that's on the Fremont side around Kennedy High School. Between Stevenson and Thornton down to Fremont Boulevard, I think you have a joint Newark Fremont district, if you want to call it that, just based on income, the demographic nature, the similarity in schools, all of that in that one area. And it forms almost a perfect square or rectangle between Newark and that center portion of Fremont. So I would ask you to take a look at that. And I think it's very important that we try to retain the school district boundaries in Union City and Newark. And I think that's about it. But I really would like us to focus on making sure that communities of interest are retained as best as possible. And I don't know how consistent we could be with USD because we have the same district jurisdiction boundary. As best as possible, I would like to see ACWD and USD have similar type districting. So I think there may be some joint coordination maybe that we could do with USD while they're going through their efforts. Those are my comments. Thank you.
So this is Judy. I just want to follow up on what Director Sethi suggested. I think that's definitely a great idea. I just want to remind you not to forget North Fremont. We're neither in Newark, or Union City. So there's that sliver of Fremont that needs to go somewhere.
This is Director Gunther. I happen to live in Union City, and I feel there's a group of interest that's been kind of left out because you gather all the Asians into one group. There's a very large Filipino community in Union City, considerably large. Now, I don't remember the numbers now, but of that Asian group, I believe recently it was the majority of the Asian group. So you have two demographics in there. You've got the Hispanic and you have the Filipino communities. And really the whole district is that way. I mean, you know, we've got the Chinese, we've got various Indian groups, and that number is not represented. And I would think it would be interesting to put that in there because the Filipino group is definitely different than, let's say, the Chinese group or the Indian groups in the communities, plus the Hispanics. That's where I have a problem with the law, in that the law was written so broadly, particularly with the Asian community. I have ties to the Filipino community, and I understand a lot of how they work. I also have ties to Union City, by the way, and I know politically the elected officials in Union City, I believe, would want to keep Union City as a whole, and that's kind of how Union Sanitary does it. I believe all of Union Sanitary District and Union City is in one district. We could accommodate I believe Director Sethi is correct. There is a small sliver, most likely Hispanic or Filipino population in Hayward. There's that one little neighborhood, I think, up there. But when drawing the maps, I also agree, if we could keep our borders similar to what Union Sanitary has, I think it represents not only for us, but it represents to the public that our missions are similar but different. And hopefully we could probably try to achieve something like that. Thank you.
So I do have another follow-up question. Is it possible to look at voting records in terms of turnout in your consideration? It's been quite a few years since I actually talked to my neighbors and campaigned. But last time I walked around my neighborhood in North Fremont, quite a few households are not eligible to vote. So if the purpose is through the voting process to give the community a voice, can we actually consider that? Or would I even make a difference? That is just a curiosity question, since when I talk to people, they basically say, oh, I don't vote because I can't, I'm not eligible. Yet we are counting them when we're drawing this district boundary, right? So how do we give people a representative voice? Do we need to account for the people that can't vote? That is just one of those idle curiosity just kind of pop in my head.
Mhm. Yeah, I wanted to make a couple related comments, but my understanding is you're to be representing all of the population. That's why the population balance is based on all the population, not just the voting population, not just citizens of voting age, but you're to represent everyone. So that's one answer to your question. Now it's tough because they don't vote, so it's harder for them to influence elections. But the second thing I wanted to say that I will bring back for the next public hearing is we do have voter data that is analyzed by the surname, the Asian surname. And so we have Filipinos separate from Indians and Chinese and Vietnamese and so on. And it's an estimate because not everybody's surname accurately reflects their Asian ethnicity, but it's better than nothing. And it's not too bad, but there are some false positives and false negatives. But I will bring that back and show you what that looks like for your district so that we'll have some disaggregation on the Asian population.
Okay, no, I just don't want to end up with a boundary that looks great in terms of number of people and racial diversity, yet only a subset of the people get to vote for their representative to represent their voice, because we run the risk of having a very small vocal group speak for the entire community that perhaps does not represent the community's voice. So that's where that question comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments from members of the board? Hearing none, it is now 8:51 and the public hearing is now closed. We thank everyone for their participation and input during this process. And as a reminder, our next special board meeting, when we will host our second public hearing, will be held on October 28th, 2021 at 4 p.m. And I'm going to pull up the agenda real quick. So I believe we will be going back one to 6.4.1, and I'll turn it to Mr. Stevenson.
Yes, thank you very much, President Akbari. And yes, I have a couple of general managers reports this evening. I'll try and keep them brief. First is an update on COVID-19. A few points. Number one, as reported previously, and as we had planned, we've opened up our customer lobby now at our headquarters facility. We did that on October 4th, and we've had a fair number of customers come in to meet with our customer service representatives since then, mainly related to water bill payments, payment arrangements, and questions and so forth. The remainder of our facilities remain closed to public access for the time being. Second point is we continue to strongly encourage all of our staff to become vaccinated. As of right now, we're at about 80% of our employees have provided confirmation of vaccination. So that's continuing to improve in that area. I had previously reported on our plans to initiate mandatory weekly COVID testing for all staff who are not vaccinated. So that program began on September 21st, and so far has been successful. There's some, of course, logistical bumps at the beginning, but we're working through those. We also arranged for an infectious disease expert, Dr. Jake Scott of Stanford Medical Center, to come to an all-hands employee forum that was held on September 22nd. And Dr. Scott provided a great deal of information, was available to answer questions from staff, was very generous with his time. And I think it was overall a very good meeting and an opportunity to inform staff more fully with regard to COVID and particularly vaccinations. Speaking of vaccinations, we're planning to hold an on-site vaccination clinic on November 4th. And this will be Holler's Pharmacy, which will come on site. That's the plan anyway. Final arrangements are still being made, but Holler's will be on site to provide vaccinations for staff that are interested, family, friends, and others who may wish to receive the COVID-19 vaccination. And finally, on this item, because the board took action this evening, making those findings that COVID continues to impact our ability to meet safely in person, we'll continue to host our public meetings virtually for the time being. And again, we'll continue to ensure that the public has full access to our public meetings. But we'll continue to monitor conditions and keep the board informed. So at some point, we'll re-office all of our employees and resume in-person board meetings too. And on that note, for those directors that have not been trained yet on the new equipment in our boardroom, which is where we would be returning to in-person board meetings, we'll be reaching out to you to arrange for the training needed for the new equipment as we near the point that in-person board meetings may resume. Last general manager's report is just a quick note that we're planning to celebrate Imagine a Day Without Water, which is next week. And unfortunately, imagining a day without water is becoming a little bit easier to do these days. So next Thursday, October 21st, we're doing things a little bit differently than we've done in the past. We want to get out into the community, meet with our customers, have discussions about the situation that we're in right now. We're planning to have 5 to 6 what we call pop-up locations, where we'll have a table set up. We'll have some information available for folks in kind of high traffic areas, hardware stores, grocery stores, and that sort of thing. And so that'll be October 21st between 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. at several locations throughout our service area. And if there's interest, we can send the final list of locations to directors so that they're interested in stopping by. You'd be free to do that. That completes my GM reports. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to address them.
John Week, quick questions on the shots. Are we going to have a flu shot day on site? And second, will the vaccinations include the booster, which complicates it that you need the booster of the same brand, I believe. There's mix and match. If we can get some guidance on whether that is how the booster should work.
Yeah, let me make sure I'm unmuted. Yeah, we will have seasonal flu shots. That'll be next week on the 20th. Again, we have a service coming in to provide 4 seasonal flu shots for staff. But for the COVID-19 vaccinations, boosters are available through this provider. However, they're really trying to stress that their main objective here, they're working off of a grant from the county. Their main objective here is to ensure that if there's anybody who needs a first-time vaccination, that's a priority. So it's possible, and we're still working with them in terms of booster shots. Yes, you're right that there are certain recommendations related to boosters having to do with some vaccines are yet to be approved for a booster shot. And so, for instance, Pfizer is, and Holler's Pharmacy is offering Pfizer, and they say that they will do boosters, but really their primary purpose is to provide for first-time vaccinations.
And the reason we don't have a COVID vaccination on the 20th, 2 different providers with different.
Yeah, two different providers. We did talk about trying to coordinate that. The seasonal flu provider doesn't do COVID vaccinations.
Thank you.
If there's no other questions for the general manager, we will move on to item 8. We've got 2 items under director's comments, reports on meetings attended, and agenda item requests. And I think the first one is Director Gunther. So why don't we have Director Gunther start us off?
Yeah, I'm trying to look at this one. I'm gonna go back into my treasure chest here. Is the last one I actually went to watch was the Sigma one, which was yesterday, as a matter of fact. I successfully got through that one. This one was a little more broken up, and there appears to be some interesting, I didn't get to see this whole presentation due to some conflicts. And, you know, I was involved in the whole series of going through California, but with the California Water, the Colorado River program, they've got some very interesting regional recycled water programs going on down in Los Angeles. The area down there, the piping, the recycled, they are really up on, you know, they beat up on Southern Cal because of lack of, you know, they're not restricting their water, but they're really on top of this recycling stuff. And so they covered into that. It was very informative. I've seen other presentations on that, and I highly recommend everybody who is doubtful of what Southern Cal is doing. And now they're pushing it even to the Colorado River programs because of the same problem they got there. So Southern Cal is really working on this. They deserve credit, and I think credit's due there. And so that's what I've got for that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Gunther. Next item is item 8.2, reports from Directors Weed, Gunther, Huang, and Akbari on September 28th, 2021's League of Women Voters meeting. I'm happy to kick this off. I don't have a whole lot to say on this, but just as a reminder, myself, Mr. Stevenson, and Ms. Hydas presented to the League of Women Voters of Fremont, Newark, and Union City. They were interested in discussing the drought, and then discussing redistricting as well. That came up. So we had good attendance. I believe we had almost a full board in attendance as well, and then quite a few members from the league who wanted to participate. There's some great questions as well. I think I definitely came away feeling like the league would be great partners for us, especially when we as we go through the redistricting process, and we encourage them to participate in the process and to provide their opinions as well. So we're looking forward to hearing from them. But I think we had a great presentation and conversation with the club that evening.
I'd like to go on this one too. I thought the staff did an excellent job with their presentation. I'd like to thank the league for doing it. I also feel that Director Akbari did an incredible job that evening representing the board. It was a great presentation. And definitely the league, it's nice having them doing this type of program, particularly with the drought. And now the districting. So thanks to the league.
I guess I'll go next. I just want to say that Mr. Stevenson, Ms. Hydas, and President Akbari did a really great job with the presentations. We also received some really good questions from the attendees and the league. Definitely want to thank the league for offering the opportunity for us to actually showcase the district, to share the information about our district, what we do, and to discuss drought and our different efforts. So definitely a great thank you and good job. And I will have to say, from the question that were asked by the league, we know they're paying attention to our district, and we really, really appreciate their participation in all our board meetings. Thank you.
I also observed the meeting. It was well done, well presented. It struck me that if we had a tape of those presentations, is something we might just be able to hand out to various groups that were interested in learning what we do and how we do it. So, but it was well presented, and thank you.
Great, and I should have also said I really appreciate the league putting on that event that evening, and I see we have Miss Tupper on the line, so if you can pass along our thanks to the league for inviting us to the club. Wonderful. Are there any other director's comments or agenda item requests before we close out item 8? Hearing none, we'll move into our closed session, item 9, and we'll start with item 9.1, pursuant to California Government Code, section 54956.9D2, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, one potential case. Item 9.2, pursuant to California Government Code, section 54956.8, conference with real property negotiators. The property under consideration is the N3 Cattle Company, consisting of 131 parcels and approximately 50,535 acres in Alameda County, Santa Clara County, San Joaquin County, and Stanislaus County. Assessors' parcel numbers were furnished by the owners as representative and are attached to the agenda. The agency negotiator is Ed Stevenson, and the negotiating parties are the N3 Cattle Company LLC, Wren Jr. and Wren Jr. Trust. Under negotiation are the price and terms of payment. Item 9.3, pursuant to California Government Code, section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators. The agency designated negotiators are Ed Stevenson, Jennifer Solito, Jonathan Wunderlich, and Stacy Q, and the employee organization is the Operating Engineers Local 3. And with that, I'll ask the district secretary to please move us into closed session. Awesome. All right. It is 10:44 p.m. and the board has reconvened in open session. We've concluded our closed session items. With 9.1, pursuant to California Government Code, section 54956.9D2, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, one potential case. No action was taken on this item. 9.2, pursuant to California Government Code, section 54956.8, conference with real property negotiators. Property under consideration is the N3 Cattle Company, consisting of 131 parcels and approximately 50,535 acres in Alameda County, Santa Clara County, San Joaquin County, and Stanislaus County. The assessor's parcel numbers were furnished by the owners as representatives and are attached to the agenda. The agency negotiator is Ed Stevenson, and the negotiating parties are the N3 Cattle Company, LLC, Wren Jr. and Wren Jr. Trust, and under negotiation is a price and terms of payment, and direction was provided to the agency negotiator. Item 9.3, pursuant to California Government Code, section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators. The agency designated negotiators are Ed Stevenson, Jennifer Solito, Jonathan Wunderlich, and Stacy Q, and the employee organization is the Operating Engineers Local 3, and direction was provided to the agency designated negotiators. With that, we concluded item 9, and at 10:46 p.m., we'll adjourn tonight's meeting. Thank you, everybody.
I do thank everybody. It's not so bad.
Thank you, Jim.